1,000 years before the fall of the Republic, before the Jedi sensed the shadow crawling toward them, a child was born in a place where sunlight rarely touched the ground. His life did not begin with prophecy or celebration. It began with a mistake, a breath taken in a world that had no room for gentleness. This is the story of Darth Bane, the man who would end an age and begin another. But long before he carved his name into the bones of the galaxy, he was simply Dessel, a boy raised beneath a sky made of smoke. Apatros was not a world people visited. It was a world they endured. A barren mining moon at the far edge of the outer rim, wrapped in dust storms and rust-colored haze. Nothing grew here. Nothing lived here except the workers whose debts chained them to the Cortosis mines. To the galaxy, Cortosis was a rare and valuable ore. To the miners, it was poison. The tunnels stretched for kilometers, reinforced by collapsing metal beams and the desperate hope that today wouldn't be the day the roof gave way. Every breath tasted of iron. Every heartbeat echoed the grind of machinery. For most children, life began with curiosity. For Dessel, it began with fear. His father, Hurst, was a miner who drank more than he worked, a man whose spirit had cracked long before Dessel was born. When the boy's mother died days after giving birth, Hurst never forgave the child who survived. Dessel learned early that speaking led to violence. So he grew quiet, listening more than he talked, shrinking into corners, studying every shift in his father's temper the way others studied weather. Anger lived in the walls of their home. It lived in Hurst's hands. It lived in Dessel's silence. And beneath that silence, something darker waited. He felt things other children didn't. When someone approached him with rage, the air around him seemed to tighten. When a tunnel was unsafe, he knew before the alarms sounded. When his father struck him, lights overhead flickered as if the world itself resisted the blow. He didn't understand it. He only understood that on Apatros, survival came before questions. The miners followed a rhythm as old as the moon itself. Wake before dawn, descend into the dark, return only when the overseers allowed it. Life wasn't measured in years. It was measured in shifts. Dessel's hands were calloused long before he reached adulthood. His back carried the weight of tools meant for men twice his age. Yet he rarely complained. Rage had no voice in him, only pressure, coiled tight, waiting for something he couldn't name. Sometimes, when he was alone in the deep tunnels, he wondered what lay beyond Apatros. He had never seen the open sky. He had never seen a star without smoke between it and his eyes. He had never seen a Jedi, a Sith, a ship, or a world that didn't feel like a cage. But he felt more. A presence in the silence, a whisper in his heartbeat. Not words, not visions, just a pull, steady and cold, like the dark was watching him back. No one else noticed. No one else cared. Children disappeared in the mines all the time, swallowed by shafts, crushed by tremors. If Dessel vanished, the overseers would open a new work slot by the next morning. But he didn't vanish. He endured. Every bruise hardened him. Every shift strengthened him. Every quiet moment fed the storm building within him. Apatros was not a birthplace. It was a forge. And deep inside it, without knowing why, Dessel was becoming something shaped by pressure, sharpened by pain, waiting for the moment he would break free. Not into the light, but deeper into the dark. The house Dessel lived in wasn't a home. It was a concrete box tucked into the lower levels of the Apatros settlement. No windows, No sound but the whine of generators and the distant thud of ore lifts. The walls were stained with old oil and older blood. The air tasted like rust, alcohol, and old breath. This is where Hearst lived. And this is where he broke his son. Hearst wasn't always a drunk, but by the time Dessel could remember anything clearly, that's all he was. A hunched man with sunken eyes and calloused hands that could crush a pipe or slap a face with equal ease. A man who came home tired, but never too tired to punish. Dessel was never enough. Too loud, too quiet, too slow, too fast. Too much like the woman Hearst had lost. Or maybe too little like the man Hearst had once hoped to become. Most nights began the same way, with the rattle of the front door, the scraping of boots, the pop of a bottle, then silence, and then the voice. Dessel. There was no hiding, not in that small room, not in that world. Sometimes the blows came fast, without reason. Other times, they came with a speech about debts, about the Union, about how Dessel had ruined everything the moment he was born. The boy never cried, not after age 6. He learned that silence slowed the storm. He learned that stillness survived. And in that stillness, the presence inside him grew stronger. He began to feel the anger before it struck. The air would shift, the light would dim, and just once the bottle in Hearst's hand shattered before it could land. Neither of them spoke about it. Hearst looked at the broken glass. Dessel looked at the floor, and nothing changed. The other miners knew. They saw the bruises, the split lip, the wince when Dessel turned too fast. But on Apatros, everyone had scars, everyone had ghosts, and nobody wasted energy saving someone else's son. At work, Dessel said little. He was big for his age, stronger than most full-grown men. The foreman liked him because he never caused trouble. The others left him alone because they saw something cold behind his eyes. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't kind. He just worked. And when his shift was over, he returned to the cage he called home. Once, he found a picture in a discarded datapad, an image of a world with trees, oceans, clouds. He stared at it for hours. Not because he longed for it, but because it looked unreal. He couldn't imagine walking without hearing metal underfoot. He couldn't imagine air that didn't taste like copper. He couldn't imagine a sky that wasn't covered in ash. That night, Hearst found the pad and tore it in half. He said, "There's no escape for scum like us. You dream, you die." Dessel didn't argue, but something inside him shifted. He began to understand that Hearst wasn't just broken. He was afraid. Afraid of the world beyond the mines. Afraid that his son might become something more than what Apatros allowed. And that fear, that weakness, gave Dessel strength. Not loud, not sudden. Just quiet power, building breath by breath. He started counting the seconds between his father's rages. He began to move more carefully, to speak only when necessary, to watch everything. Not like a victim, like a predator, learning. The beatings continued, but they no longer hurt the same. They no longer reached whatever was forming in him. He didn't know what to call it, only that it was waiting, watching, like him. A shadow, not cast by his father but rising behind him. Soon, it would stand on its own. The mines of Apatros were deeper than they looked. They wound down like veins into the planet's crust, twisting through layers of ancient rock and unstable cortosis seams. Some shafts were sealed, others forgotten. and a few had no end at all, just darkness that swallowed sound and light alike. Dessel learned those tunnels better than most. He didn't just follow his shift route. He listened. The vibrations of drills, the soft groan of stressed supports, the way the air changed just before a collapse. To the other workers, it was superstition. To Dessel, it was survival. He was strong now, almost 20, broad-shouldered and silent. A man in everything but peace. But the rage inside him hadn't vanished. It had evolved. He could control it now, shape it. But he didn't know what it was, only that it helped him see danger before it came. Helped him lift or others couldn't. Helped him strike when necessary, and only then. One afternoon, during a cave-in on level 7, a tunnel gave way. A slab of rock bigger than a freighter bulkhead crashed down, pinning a worker's leg. The others hesitated. Dessel didn't. He moved without thinking. His hands bled as he gripped the edge of the stone. He shouted for leverage, but no one helped. Then something else took over. His muscles burned, yes, but the pain didn't matter. His breath slowed, his mind emptied, and the rock moved. Later, no one could explain how he'd done it. The trapped worker didn't even thank him. He only looked at Dessel like he was something unnatural. Whispers started again after that. Days isn't normal. He's not like the rest of us. Watch him. He didn't respond. He kept working, but something inside him was listening. The deeper he went, the more the mines felt familiar. The quiet, the heat, the silence of stone. He began to spend extra time in the shafts after hours, long after the alarms had signaled the end of the workday. Down there, away from lights, away from voices, he could feel it again. That presence, that pull. He didn't know the word for it. He didn't know the history, but it felt like the darkness welcomed him. Not as prey, as kin. Sometimes he closed his eyes and reached into it, and the air would tighten, the silence would change, his heartbeat would slow. He felt like a part of the rock, of the dark, of something old that had been waiting for him. Not a voice, not a vision, just permission. A few weeks later, during a card game in the mess hall, one of the off-duty miners accused Dessel of cheating. The man was older, mean, drunk. He threw the first punch. Dessel didn't remember what happened next. Only that the room had gone quiet. Only that his fist felt numb. Only that the other man was on the floor, not breathing. The medics tried, but it was too late. The overseer ruled it self-defense. But something had changed. The other miners stopped meeting his eyes. Even the guards gave him space. No one said it aloud, but they knew. They'd seen anger before, seen fights. But Dessel's rage had shape, precision. It was like a blade, clean, controlled, lethal. And that night, as he sat in his bunk, staring at the darkness above, he didn't feel guilt. He felt clarity. Not joy, not triumph. Just a strange stillness. As if something inside him had been waiting for that moment. A door, opening in the dark. No light behind it. Just more depth. He was no longer just enduring. He was beginning to awaken. The night before everything changed, Apatros was quiet. The winds outside the complex had settled. The tunnels were still. The sky above the refinery dome pulsed with a sick red haze, too dim to light anything below. Inside his quarters, Dessel sat alone. The shift had ended hours ago. The others were drinking, laughing, pretending they weren't trapped. He stayed behind, not because he was afraid, because he knew the world didn't want him anymore. His knuckles still ached from the last fight. The blood had been washed away, the whispers had faded, but the feeling remained like a thread had been cut, and nothing was holding him here anymore. The door creaked. His father stood in the frame, drunk again, eyes bloodshot, voice low. "You think you're something now," Hurst muttered. "You think you're better than the rest of us." Dessel didn't answer, not because he was afraid, because he didn't need to. Hurst stepped forward. "You've always been trouble, since the day you killed your mother coming out of her. You should have died in that cot, just like she did." The silence between them turned sharp. Years of bruises, years of shouted threats and long, echoing fists. They didn't flash before Dessel's eyes, they burned. And this time, something in him refused to bow. His father moved closer, raised his hand, but it never landed. Dessel's arm shot forward faster than thought, driven not by fear but by something deeper. A single punch, one strike. His father staggered back, hit the wall, and slumped to the floor. No movement, no breath, just stillness. Dessel stood there, staring at the man who had broken him every day of his life. Now broken, in return. He didn't run. He didn't speak. He simply waited. Minutes passed. Then the thought arrived, quiet and steady. It's over. He didn't feel regret. He didn't feel free. Just hollow. Like something old had been emptied out. Like the boy named Dessel had ended there, beside that wall. The next morning, the body was found. No investigation, no questions. The medics said it was a fall, said Hurst had slipped in his own home. The overseers didn't argue, one less drunk to manage. But Dessel knew the truth. So did the Force. He could feel it now, whispering more clearly than ever. Not with words, with weight. A quiet rhythm guiding him, telling him this world had served its purpose. There was nothing left here. That evening, after shift, he walked into the cantina alone. The gamblers were loud, distracted. Credits passed hands. Dessel joined a table, sat across from Republic soldiers stationed nearby. Their laughter faded as the game stretched on. Tempers rose, accusations flared. One man, a corporal, accused him of cheating. Same as before. But this time, the reaction was planned, precise. Dessel stood, said nothing, let the rage rise behind his eyes. The soldier drew first, a knife, quick and trembling. But Dessel moved faster. When it was over, the corporal was on the floor choking, blood rising in his throat. The other soldiers reached for their blasters. Dessel was gone. Into the night, into the mines, into the shadows. He didn't pack, didn't say goodbye. He left behind a world that had beaten him, shaped him, raised him. And in the silence between one breath and the next, he vanished. No one would see him again on Apatros, because the boy had died with his father, and something else had taken his place. Not a miner, not a killer, not yet a Sith, but already something more than a man. Already something the galaxy had forgotten how to fear. He didn't plan the killing. He didn't plan any of it. But the galaxy rarely waits for plans. Dessel had left Apatros behind, but it never truly let go. The mind still clung to his lungs. The silence of stone still rang in his ears. The blood on his hands, that was newer, but it didn't feel foreign. It happened in the cantina, on a nameless world along a Republic supply route. He'd paid a crew to smuggle him off Apatros under a false name. What little credits he had were enough for one jump. The ship was slow, and the spaceport was slower. Dessel had time to think. Too much time. And so, when he walked into the cantina to blend in to be forgotten, the last thing he expected was recognition. The soldier was drunk, Republic insignia half torn from his sleeve, loud, unsteady, and angry. He called Dessel a deserter, a thief, a killer. Not because he knew the truth, just because he needed someone to blame. But Dessel had already been blamed, his whole life, and he didn't want to be blamed anymore. The soldier drew a vibroblade. The air in the cantina snapped cold. The others backed away, silent, breath held like glass. Dessel didn't think. He moved. Not like a miner, not like a drunk, like a predator. One twist, one strike, one gasp. The soldier dropped the blade, then dropped everything else. Dessel watched him fall slow, heavy, final. The body hit the floor with a sound louder than the music. Blood spread like oil across the durasteel. Someone screamed, someone ran, and Dessel just stood there, breathing, watching, waiting for the fear to come. It didn't. Only stillness. Not peace, just silence. The same silence he'd known his whole life. Only now, it belonged to him. By the time security arrived, he was gone. No name, no trace. Just a story. The authorities called it murder. The Republic branded him a fugitive. The soldiers' unit posted a reward. But far away on a ship moving toward the warfront, no one cared what name he had once used. He was tall, he was quiet, and he knew how to kill. That was enough for the Gloom Walkers. They were a Sith-aligned infantry division, not part of the Sith Order, not yet, just soldiers, mercenaries in black, fighting the Republic in the Outer Rim where no treaties reached. They didn't ask questions, they needed bodies. They gave him a blaster, a ration card, and a number. He gave them silence. The officers didn't like him, but the men respected him. Fear and respect often looked the same. In his first deployment, he took down 2 enemy scouts before they saw him. He didn't boast. He didn't explain. In his second, he dragged a wounded squadmate out of a cave while under fire. The squadmate never forgot. Dessel never mentioned it again. War, unlike life on Apatros, made sense. The rules were clear. The orders were simple. There was an enemy. You stopped them, or they stopped you. Pain had a reason now. Death had a purpose. He didn't know how long it would last. He didn't know how it would end. But for the first time, he felt aligned with something. Not with the Sith. Not yet. Not with the Republic. Never. With the violence. With the silence after the violence. With the way every day made him feel less like someone running from the past, and more like someone being sculpted by the present. No name, no family, no planet. Just war. And in war, he was beginning to feel alive. The Gloom Walkers didn't wear armor with rank stripes or polished insignias. Their uniforms were stained with smoke, dust, and blood, none of it ceremonial. They didn't march. They didn't salute. They survived. They were stationed on Fezira, a wet, heavy planet with low valleys and higher death tolls. Rain fell almost constantly. Not enough to clean the mud, just enough to drown in it. The sky was always gray, like the air hadn't decided whether to rise or collapse. Dessel didn't care. He preferred the shadows, and the Gloom Walkers didn't mind what you preferred, so long as you could shoot straight. Their missions were simple, brutal, and constant. Strike outposts, burn supply lines, break morale. Move fast, don't speak, don't look back. At first, they gave him a bunk with the others, a tarp over wet soil, a cracked heater that worked twice a week. He barely slept. He listened to their breathing, their muttering, the way their voices changed before deployment. They thought he was odd, thought he kept to himself too much. But after a few battles, they stopped wondering. Because when the fighting started, Dessel didn't blink. He moved through blaster fire like it was fog. He returned from missions others didn't. He didn't lose control. He didn't hesitate. And the commanders noticed. They called him lucky at first, but luck didn't block a grenade with a dead trooper's body. Luck didn't sense an ambush 30 seconds before it hit. The whispers grew louder. He sees things. He feels when it's coming. He's not normal. Dessel ignored them. Not because they were wrong, because they were too late. The truth had already taken root. He did feel something. A pull, just beneath the noise of war. A current that moved through his hands when he gripped a blaster, through his lungs when he exhaled before a shot. A quiet certainty that told him exactly when to duck, when to fire, when to vanish. The others chalked it up to instinct. He didn't correct them, because he didn't know what it was either. Only that it had grown stronger since he left Apatros. And in battle, it felt closer. Phasira became a blur of deployments, villages taken, lost, retaken. Dessel stopped marking time. The stars above the planet never changed. His weapons changed faster than his commanders. Once, during a supply run gone wrong, his squad was ambushed in a ravine. 3 died in the first volley. The rest froze. Dessel didn't. He flanked the enemy position alone, slid down a mud-covered slope under fire, took out the machine gun nest with a single thermal. When the squad reassembled, they looked at him like he wasn't one of them anymore. He wasn't sure he was. He didn't feel relief after the fight. He didn't feel guilt. He felt clarity. There was something in war that reminded him of the mines, the pressure, the silence before collapse, the narrow spaces where one wrong move ended everything. But this time, he wasn't the victim of it. He was the collapse. The Gloom Walkers gave him more dangerous assignments. He never said no. His kill count rose. His sleep got shorter. His presence got quieter. He didn't brag. He didn't bond. He simply waited for the next mission. Because each one pushed him closer to something he couldn't name. A place inside the violence that felt familiar. Not warm, not safe, but honest. And in that honesty, Dessel felt more like himself than he ever had before. War didn't change Dessel. It revealed him. Every deployment stripped something away: fear, hesitation, doubt. And what remained was someone the Gloom Walkers didn't know how to name. Some said he was lucky, others said he was cursed. But Dessel didn't believe in either. He believed in survival. On Phasira, the war shifted without warning. Outposts fell overnight. Terrain that seemed safe turned into killing grounds. Even the commanders rotated too quickly to learn their soldiers' names. But the men knew Dessel's. Not because he talked, because he lived. And because somehow, the squads he joined lived too. The Republic troops weren't weak. They fought with discipline and training the Gloom Walkers didn't have. Their armor was cleaner, their rifles newer, their officers more organized. But Dessel understood something the others didn't. The Republic fought to protect something. He fought because he had nothing left to lose. And the Force, though he didn't yet know its name, carried him. During one ambush near the marshlands, a squad of Republic commandos surrounded the Gloom Walkers in a ring of fire. Blasters lit the dark, mud boiled under heat. Men scrambled for cover. Dessel didn't. He stepped forward, feeling the pressure in his chest shift like the world held its breath. He moved through the smoke in silence. He didn't rush, he didn't stumble. He simply followed the calm inside him, like a faint current guiding his steps. His shots found targets before he fully saw them. His body twisted away from blaster bolts he didn't consciously register. When the last commando fell, the walkers stared at him like they'd witnessed something impossible. He felt nothing. Not triumph, not pride. Only the same stillness he felt before the killing blow. The same quiet that filled the mines before a support beam snapped. It was never about anger. It was never about hatred. It was about certainty. A knowledge that the moment belonged to him, and that he was meant to act. The Sith regulars who oversaw the conflict began to notice. Not Sith lords, but officers loyal to them, men who understood power when they saw it. They questioned his background. He gave short answers, nothing worth remembering. They asked how he planned his kills. He told them he didn't plan. He reacted. They asked why he didn't fear death. He didn't answer. The officers thought he was hiding something. But the truth was simpler. He wasn't hiding anything. He was becoming something. More missions followed, each one more reckless than the last. In a nighttime raid on a Republic camp, he led the approach without being ordered. No one questioned him, they followed. They moved through the brush like shadows, and Dessel cut through the defenders as if he'd been born holding a blaster. Another time, a Republic sergeant pinned their squad down from the cliffs above the valley. The firing was relentless. Men were dying. Dessel crawled out alone, inch by inch, until he reached the base of the cliff. The sergeant never saw him climb. Never saw him step behind him. Never saw the end coming. When Dessel returned to the squad, the firing had stopped. He didn't explain what he'd done. He didn't need to. The Gloom Walkers didn't celebrate him. They watched him. Respect and fear blurred together in their eyes. Because in a war full of chaos, Dessel was the one constant, a soldier who didn't break, didn't falter, didn't question. He fought like someone who'd been shaped for this. As if the noise of battle was quieter than the noise of his past. And in the silence after each mission, when the campfires dimmed and the wounded slept, he began to understand something he could never explain. He wasn't surviving the war. He was growing inside it. The Sith didn't need scouts to find him. They already knew where to look. Dessel wasn't important to the war. Not officially. He wasn't a commander, a decorated officer, or even someone with a full name on record. But in dark corners of the war effort, within encrypted transmissions and hushed conversations, his actions had been noticed. And in the Sith hierarchy, noticing meant something. The Brotherhood of Darkness controlled the Sith military machine. Dozens of lords, hundreds of dark Jedi, a bloated, fracturing order that called itself unified. But within their ranks, some had begun searching for something more. They weren't looking for another blade. They were looking for ambition. And on Facera, in the mud and blood of a nameless front, they saw a shadow growing around an ordinary soldier. Dessel didn't know who they were, but he felt them. During missions, the sense of being watched grew stronger, even when no ships hovered overhead, even when no officers lingered, even when he was alone. It wasn't fear, it was pressure. Like the Force itself was being pulled tighter around him. Like eyes, not of men, but of power, had turned in his direction. He began to see things before they happened, not just danger, but decisions. The wrong path, the moment to strike, the word not to say. In a war full of chaos, he had become a mirror reflecting only what mattered. Action, victory, survival. And in doing so, he had drawn them closer. The first to approach wasn't a lord, just a messenger. Pale robes, silver eyes, voice too calm for a battlefield. He found Dessel in the aftermath of a skirmish, Republic bodies still smoking in the grass, the gloom walkers patching wounds or counting ammo. The messenger didn't speak right away. He watched Dessel tend to a blaster burn on his own arm, methodically, without flinching. Then he said only 2 words. "You feel it." Dessel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The messenger nodded, as if silence confirmed more than speech ever could. He handed Dessel a data chip, coordinates, a name, Korriban. The word meant nothing to Dessel, but it echoed anyway, like it had been waiting in the back of his mind, sealed behind a door now slightly open. The messenger left. No explanation, no threat, no promise. And Dessel didn't chase after him, because something inside him already knew this wasn't an offer, it was a calling. Later that night, while the others slept, he stood outside the camp and stared up at the sky. Still gray, still motionless. But for the first time, it felt like part of something bigger. The war continued without him. He didn't say goodbye to the gloom walkers, didn't leave a trace. He just walked. He walked away from the ranks that had kept him alive, from the only structure that had ever made sense, from the noise, the orders, the endless killing. Because even the war, for all its blood and clarity, was not enough anymore. Not for what he was becoming. He boarded a transport off-world under an alias. He sat in silence, eyes closed, breathing slow. And somewhere in the black between stars, he understood what the feeling had been all along. He wasn't being watched. He was being chosen. The transport dropped out of hyperspace beside a world that looked wounded by time. Korriban hung in the void like a scar of rust and shadow. Dessel felt the change before he saw the surface. A weight settled on his chest, slow and cold, as if the planet recognized him. The Force was thick here, but he didn't know that name yet. He only sensed a presence rising to meet him, silent and patient. The shuttle descended toward the Valley of the Dark Lords, cutting through orange dust storms that curled like ghosts around ancient stone. Tombs carved by Sith thousands of years dead towered over the landing path. Their faces were worn away, but their power had not faded. Dessel stepped onto the soil and felt something inside him tighten, as if a door long sealed had opened a fraction. The acolytes who greeted him wore dark robes and tired eyes. They looked like men pretending to be more than they were. One of them took his name, another took his identification, a third took the last piece of his past and tossed it aside. No one asked who he had been, no one cared. On Korriban, identity meant nothing until it was earned through strength. The academy rose from the sand like a clawed monument. Its walls were carved with symbols he couldn't read but somehow understood. Inside, the air was colder, not from wind, but from the presence of those who had walked these halls before, Sith lords whose echoes lingered. Teachers watched him with narrow eyes, sensing raw potential wrapped in ignorance. Students watched with something closer to hunger. Dessel felt none of it. He moved through the corridors like someone searching for a voice he had heard once in a dream. In the training yard, the other apprentices fought with confidence sharpened by years of study. He fought with something older, instinct shaped by survival. Every strike reminded him of the mines. Every dodge echoed the shifts where tunnels collapsed without warning. Pain was familiar, almost grounding. Some apprentices mocked him for his rough technique. Others stayed silent, uneasy with how quickly he adapted. He learned faster than any of them expected, not because the lessons were clear, but because the darkness within him recognized them. At night, he lay awake in the barracks, listening to the distant howl of Korriban's winds. They sounded like warnings whispered in ancient tongues. The academy felt alive. Its stones seemed to breathe, shifting beneath moonlight, pulsing with memories of rituals long buried yet never gone. Dessel knew he belonged here, though he didn't know why. The darkness did. It wrapped around him like a forgotten promise. Every day pushed him further from the man he had been. The miners, the gloom walkers, the life of dust and trenches, all of it faded. Strength meant more here, knowledge meant more. But power, true power, was something different. It was something the teachers claimed to control. Dessel sensed their lies before he understood them. Their smiles were masks. Their lessons held fear. The Brotherhood wanted obedience, not greatness. He felt eyes on him everywhere he went. Not from students, but from the academy itself, as though it waited for him to choose a path. He didn't know that the choice had already been made the moment he touched Korriban's soil. The planet had claimed him as its own. And in the quiet between lessons, beneath the red sky and silent tombs, something ancient inside him began to rise, shaping the name he had yet to earn. He did not understand it, not yet. But the darkness around him welcomed every breath he took, guiding him toward the fate waiting beyond these halls, a fate that would reshape the galaxy forever. The Brotherhood called it training, but Bane saw what it really was. Every lesson at the Sith Academy felt like a game, and not one played for survival, but for status. The Masters lectured on passion, but rewarded obedience. They taught the power of the dark side, but discouraged its use when it wasn't approved. It felt wrong, not because it was cruel, but because it was hollow. Bane learned quickly, too quickly. His strength grew with each session. His control over the Force, once unconscious, now sharpened with intent. But the other apprentices didn't celebrate his progress. They whispered. They plotted. On Korriban, strength was currency, but fear was the true language of the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood of Darkness was supposed to be the pinnacle of the Sith, a unification of power under a single banner, led by Lord Khan. They had ended centuries of civil war among the Sith. But peace, Bane realized, had cost them their edge. In the training arena, he watched skilled warriors pull their strikes just enough not to offend the masters. He watched students bow before those they despised, feign weakness to hide ambition, smile while they schemed. They were Sith in name only. He remembered the battlefield where death was real, where power was tested without speeches. Here, everything felt like theater. And yet, he learned. Because even in a broken order, knowledge was knowledge. He memorized the code of the Sith. He studied the rituals not for their spectacle, but for the feeling they stirred inside his blood. He practiced techniques older than the Brotherhood itself, buried deep in restricted archives, whispered in tombs that the instructors warned him to avoid. He did not avoid them. The tombs of the old Sith Lords called to him in a way the living never could. Ajunta Pal, Marka Ragnos, Tulak Horde. Their spirits no longer walked, but their legacy echoed through the Force like pressure behind his eyes. The instructors noticed his interest. They warned him, politely at first, then with silence. But Bane wasn't looking for permission. He was looking for truth. The more he read, the more he saw how much the Brotherhood had forgotten. Their power was shared, diluted, managed through councils and ranks. 100 Sith calling themselves equals. But the old text spoke of something else, of power passed from master to apprentice, not split among peers, of strength proven through confrontation, not consensus. He asked questions during lessons, not to challenge, but to understand. Why were the old ways forbidden? Why did Lord Khan preach unity when the Sith had always thrived on conflict? Why did so many masters fear the past? They told him the old ways had failed, that the infighting of the ancient Sith had brought only destruction. But Bane felt that wasn't the whole truth. He felt it in their eyes when he asked too much. He felt it in the way they spoke about the Jedi war like politicians, not warriors. The Brotherhood wanted order, but the Force was not made for order. It was made for power, and that power was slipping through their fingers. He began to isolate himself, not out of fear, out of clarity. The other apprentices trained to gain favor. He trained to understand. In the dueling ring, he stopped holding back. He didn't kill yet, but he came close enough to send a message. Not to his rivals, to the Brotherhood. He wasn't afraid of their hierarchy. Because he had seen death, he had lived with rage, and he had touched the edge of something older than any master in the academy could explain. He didn't know what to call it yet, but deep within him, Bane knew. The Sith were broken, and he was going to break them further. Doubt didn't strike Bane like a blade. It seeped into him slowly, settling between lessons, sharpening every thought. The more he learned, the more the Brotherhood's teachings felt wrong. Not weak but incomplete, like fragments of something greater that had been buried on purpose. The instructors praised balance within the order. They praised unity. They preached that no Sith should rise above another, that the force of many outweighed the will of one. But Bane felt the Force differently. When he pushed himself, when he reached deeper, the power didn't disperse. It condensed. It tightened around him like a fist closing. The masters told him to restrain it. He didn't. His strength grew anyway. But with growth came danger. His fellow apprentices watched him with careful eyes. Some envied his progress, others feared it. A few began to avoid him in the halls, as if sensing the storm forming quietly inside his chest. He didn't seek conflict, but conflict found him easily. During a sparring match, an older student named Sirac, one of the Academy's most celebrated duelists, challenged him directly. Sirac fought with precision and arrogance, his blade moving with years of practiced cruelty. Bane fought with something else. Not anger, not pride. A cold, focused pressure that guided his hand. Their blades clashed, sparks slicing through the air. But Bane wasn't ready. Not yet. Sirac disarmed him in 3 moves and slammed him into the floor, leaving him gasping for breath. The other students laughed. The masters watched without expression. But humiliation didn't wound him. It revealed something. Sirach had followed the Brotherhood's path for years, memorizing every technique, every doctrine. And yet Bane felt deep in his bones that this was not the peak of Sith strength. This was not the truth the old lords had lived by. Something inside him whispered that Sirach's victory meant nothing, that the real battle hadn't begun yet. Later that night, Bane returned to the archives. He searched for answers with the desperation of someone trying to remember a forgotten language. He read scrolls so old the ink had thinned to dust. He memorized teachings the masters refused to discuss. And slowly, a pattern formed. The ancient Sith had not feared power. They had embraced it. They had challenged one another. They had fought, killed, learned, and grown without apology. The Brotherhood of Darkness had taken that history and buried it under false unity. Why? The question carved itself into him like stone underwater. The instructors discouraged solitary research. They encouraged group study, claiming that knowledge shared was knowledge strengthened. But Bane couldn't share what he found. He couldn't trust anyone with it. Not yet. Every truth he uncovered felt dangerous to speak aloud. Every line of ancient text felt like a blade placed quietly in his hand. And with each passing day, the gap between him and the rest of the academy widened. He felt different, not better, not superior, just separate. The Force responded to him in a way it didn't respond to the others. It pushed him. It tested him. It revealed the emptiness behind the Brotherhood's polished teachings. But doubt had a shadow. And that shadow was fear, not fear of the other apprentices, not fear of the masters, but fear of himself. He didn't fear his strength. He feared what it meant. If the Brotherhood was wrong, if the ancient ways held the truth, then every path he had followed until now was only a doorway. And stepping through that doorway would change everything. He wasn't ready to abandon the Brotherhood, but he wasn't willing to obey it blindly anymore. Something deeper was calling to him through the cracks in their teachings. Something old, something ruthless, something true. And soon, he knew, the Academy would sense the change in him. They already had. The shift inside him did not happen suddenly. It crept in during quiet moments between breaths, between lessons, between the echoes of ancient Sith names whispered in forgotten tombs. The Academy taught that strength came from unity, that the Brotherhood was the future of the Sith, that power shared was power multiplied. But the Force behind Bane's eyes told him otherwise. It showed him cracks in the Brotherhood's foundation. It revealed the fear in the instructor's movements whenever a student pushed too far. It whispered that true power was not meant for groups or councils. It belonged to the one who could claim it. The change began to show. His presence grew heavier. His focus sharpened. His silence carried weight that made even seasoned apprentices step aside in the corridors. They didn't understand what they sensed in him. They only knew it wasn't like their own power. Bane started training alone in the early hours, long before the drills began. He meditated in the Valley of the Dark Lords, letting the ancient stone press against his mind like a test. He practiced forms until his arms trembled and the harsh red sky blurred above him. He wasn't chasing strength. He was uncovering it. One evening, while crossing the courtyard, he felt a presence approach him, cold but curious. A small group of apprentices blocked his path. Their leader, Gerd, wore a practiced smile, the kind of expression used to hide a blade. They weren't here to duel. They were here to measure him. "Sirach won't be beaten by you," Gerd said quietly, as though speaking a prophecy rather than a threat. Bane didn't answer. The apprentices stepped closer, not attacking, watching, waiting, trying to see whether fear existed behind his eyes. They found nothing. Because the deeper he went into the teachings of the old Sith, the more the Brotherhood's judgments felt insignificant. Their ranks, their rules, their warnings, none of it touched the shadow awakening within him. When Gerd finally walked away, he did so with a stiffness that revealed more fear than confidence. Bane continued forward without looking back. In the days that followed, he felt the Academy's attention shift. Not overtly, not aggressively, just enough to confirm what he already knew. Someone had noticed. Not the apprentices, not the instructors, someone higher. During a meditation session, he felt a disturbance sweep through the training grounds. A pressure, sharp and thin, like a blade sliding across the surface of the Force. It wasn't aimed at the Academy. It was aimed at him. The presence was unfamiliar, but its intent was unmistakable. It was studying him. That night, unable to shake the feeling, Bane walked alone into the valley. Wind howled between the tombs, carrying sand that stung his skin. The sculptures loomed like giants carved from memory, watching with hollow eyes. He felt the ancient power here more clearly than he felt the instructor's teachings. He knelt before one of the tomb entrances, closing his eyes, breathing slowly, listening. In the darkness of his mind, the Force rose like a tide, cold, endless, aware. Images flickered through him. Not visions, echoes, of warriors who fought without fear, of masters who killed their apprentices, of apprentices who surpassed them, of a truth the Brotherhood had tried to bury. When he opened his eyes, his breath came with a certainty he had never felt before. The shadow inside him did not belong to the Brotherhood. It did not belong to Lord Khan. It did not belong to anyone on Korriban. It belonged to the ancient Sith, the ones who had shaped darkness long before the Brotherhood existed. And it was waiting for him to choose. He walked back to the Academy with his path no longer clouded. Whatever came next, conflict, exile, revelation, it would not be defined by their rules. The shadow behind his eyes was not a threat. It was a promise. The loss wasn't physical. It was something deeper. After his second defeat at Sirach's hands, Bane didn't argue. He didn't protest the unfairness of it. He simply stood in silence, bleeding, humiliated, with his fists still clenched but his will adrift. He had thought strength was all that mattered, that by growing in power, by pushing harder than anyone else, he would rise above the lies of the Brotherhood. But strength alone hadn't saved him. Not this time. Sirach was favored, protected, and Bane, despite everything he had learned, had failed. The instructors didn't intervene. They never did when it came to him now, not because they trusted him, but because they wanted to see how far he would fall. In the hours after, Bane walked the corridors of the Academy in silence. His footsteps echoed through stone halls that once whispered to him. Now they said nothing. The other students didn't mock him. They didn't need to. Silence could cut deeper than laughter. He stopped attending the lectures. He avoided the training yard. He let the bruises heal, slowly, but the damage had already settled in his thoughts. He had felt chosen, once. Now, he felt nothing. In the mess hall, he sat alone. In the dormitory, he slept in corners untouched by light. He began to believe maybe the instructors were right, that the ancient Sith had failed, that the Brotherhood's unity was necessary, that ambition without guidance only led to ruin. He tried to believe it, but the feeling in his chest, the hollow space where fire used to live, refused to accept that lie. The more he sat in the academy, the more the force around him seemed distant, blunted, like it didn't belong to this place anymore. One evening, he stood at the edge of the outer terrace and stared toward the Valley of the Dark Lords. The wind was sharp, the sky bruised red, and in the distance, where ancient stone towers marked the graves of monsters, he felt something stir. The valley wasn't part of the formal academy curriculum. It was spoken of with caution, honored in word, but avoided in practice. A place of memory, reverence, but not study. That too felt like a lie. He left that same night. No announcement, no permission, no escort. He wrapped himself in a cloak, took a ration kit, and crossed the threshold between the man-made and the forgotten. The ground changed beneath his boots from smooth duracrete to uneven rocks scarred by centuries of wind and ritual. The tombs rose around him like broken teeth, names half erased by time, stories lost to dust, but not their power that remained. In the silence of the valley, there were no lectures, no eyes watching, no hierarchy, only the feeling, that pressure again, the one that had followed him since Apatros, since Phasira, since the first time he had ever felt afraid and refused to die from it. Now it pulled at him gently, not commanding, not forcing, just waiting. He found an empty cave just beyond the central path, one that looked too shallow to matter. Inside, he set down his pack, cleared a space, and sat. He didn't speak. He didn't meditate. He just listened. Hours passed, or days. He lost track. He watched the sun rise and fall through a crack in the cave ceiling. He listened to sand scrape against stone. He ate only when his body demanded it. And slowly, the silence began to answer him. Not with words, not with voices, with gravity, with memory, with the echo of truths that had not been spoken aloud in centuries. This wasn't exile. It was a return. And he hadn't come here to be healed. He had come to be redefined. The valley did not welcome him. It judged him. Every step Bane took deeper into the tombs felt like he was walking through the lungs of something enormous and long dead. The air was heavy with dust that had never known sunlight. The walls pressed inward, carved with symbols that pulsed with meaning even when his mind failed to understand them. He passed the entrance of Ajuntapol's tomb first. The stone doors towered over him like a warning. The inscriptions were almost unreadable, eaten by time, but the presence behind them was not. It watched him, not as a teacher, as a test. He did not enter yet. Even he could sense he was not ready for what lingered inside. Further down the path, the wind changed. It moved differently here, carrying the faint echo of chants spoken by voices that no longer had bodies. The sound crawled across the back of his neck, like a whisper trying to take shape. Bane slowed. He wasn't frightened. Fear felt strangely honest now. Korriban had no illusions, no pretended unity, no soft teachings. Only the truth of power, carved in stone and left behind by those who had embraced it fully. He approached another tomb, massive, jagged, half-collapsed. Inside, shadows pooled like water. A faint, cold draft brushed his cheek as he stepped toward the threshold. His heartbeat slowed, not from calm, from recognition. He felt something inside that tomb calling to him, not a voice, just a pull, steady and irresistible, like gravity finding a lost piece of itself. He stepped inside. The darkness swallowed him completely. The only sound was the echo of his own breath, sharp against walls that had heard centuries of silence. He walked slowly, hand brushing the stone, feeling its age press against him. This place had seen death, but not defeat. The energy here wasn't mournful. It was expectant. A single torch flickered to life without warning. He froze. The flame revealed a corridor lined with carvings, the story of a Sith Lord's rise, carved in cruel, elegant strokes. Conquests, betrayals, rituals, teachings. Not sanitized, not restrained. The Sith here had lived through the blade, through fear, through domination. Not unity. Never unity. Each line carved into the wall felt like a blow to the Brotherhood's doctrine. The Masters claimed the ancient ways had died from infighting, but these carvings told a different truth. The ancient Sith had thrived on conflict. They had grown through it. They had drawn power from the very struggle the Brotherhood condemned. Bane felt his pulse quicken, not with anger, with clarity. He moved deeper. The tunnel opened into a chamber lit by faint red crystals embedded in the floor. In the center lay a stone pedestal, and on it, broken pieces of a holocron centuries old, cracked but still humming faintly with power. He reached toward it. The air around the pedestal thickened, resisting him, testing him. The force pressed back at his hand, cold and sharp. It didn't want him to touch it. Not until he proved he deserved it. He swallowed, then pushed harder. The pressure grew. His arm trembled. His breath came in shallow bursts. But he did not pull away. When his fingers finally brushed the holocron fragment, a jolt surged through him, images flashing like lightning. A master raising an apprentice, knowing they would one day die by that apprentice's blade. A line of Sith stretching through centuries, each stronger than the last. A law written not in stone, but in blood. There was no unity, no brotherhood, only evolution. Only two. The vision ended as abruptly as it began. Bane staggered back, gasping, his heart pounding like a fist against his ribs. But he wasn't afraid. For the first time since he arrived on Korriban, he felt the presence inside him settle into place. The tombs hadn't shown him something new. They had reminded him of something ancient. The Sith had forgotten their truth, but he had just remembered it. And the valley, for the first time, did not judge him. It accepted him. The holocron didn't speak in words. It spoke in truths. Each time Bane returned to the tomb, he sat before the fractured artifact with silence, not desperation. And each time, it gave more, not freely, not gently, but deliberately. What remained of its gatekeeper, the ancient intelligence bound to protect its knowledge, tested him each session. Through pain, through pressure, through the sharp realization that most would break before reaching understanding. Bane did not break. His mind adjusted. His will adapted. And as the hours passed, knowledge returned. It was fragmented, incomplete. But what survived struck him deeper than any blade. The Sith had once followed a single truth. One master, one apprentice. A line, not an order. A chain, not a council. They called it the rule of two. It had not been designed for conquest. Not at first. It had been designed for survival. When Sith ruled in legions, they turned inward. Their power devoured itself. Each lord feared the other. Each apprentice waited with poison behind their back. Their strength crumbled under the weight of their own ambition. Not because ambition was a flaw, but because it was left unfocused. The rule of two had not been created to suppress that ambition. It had been created to weaponize it. A master would embody the dark side. The apprentice would crave it. And when the apprentice grew strong enough to destroy their master, they would become the new embodiment. Not through inheritance, through victory. The chain would continue stronger each generation. Ruthless, refined. No betrayal, no war between equals. Only the evolution of darkness itself. Bane sat with the truth like someone staring at fire for the first time, entranced by what it could destroy, but more shaken by what it could reveal. It explained everything. The weakness of the Brotherhood, the failure of its unity, the emptiness of its councils and collective teachings. They had forgotten what it meant to be Sith. They had preserved the symbols but lost the purpose. The holocron offered no comfort, no encouragement. It wasn't trying to convert him. It simply existed, a memory of what had been, a standard that no one else remembered or dared to speak aloud. Bane's thoughts returned to Lord Khan, a charismatic manipulator who called himself brother to all Sith, who taught that equality protected them from ruin, who believed numbers would triumph where hunger had failed. But Lord Khan didn't lead the Sith. He contained them, and that containment had bled their power dry. Bane didn't feel anger. Not yet. Only precision. A sense that the question he had asked since his first days in the academy had finally been answered. He had always felt separate. Always sensed that what the instructors taught was a shell without substance. Now he understood why. The Brotherhood was not just mistaken. It was unnatural, and its survival was a threat to the very essence of the dark side. The Sith were not meant to share power. They were meant to challenge it, to test it, refine it, destroy weakness through inheritance by destruction. Bane rose from the tomb, the image of the rule still burning behind his eyes. He didn't speak as he stepped back into the valley. He didn't need to. The wind shifted as he passed the outer stones, the red sky above rippling with sand and shadow. He was no longer lost in doubt, no longer questioning what the Sith had become. He had found the answer buried in ashes, in dust, in the voice of the dead. The Brotherhood must fall, not because it was evil, because it was unworthy. The academy didn't notice when he returned. They had grown used to his silence, his absence, his isolation. To them, he was just another student fading toward failure. But something had changed. Bane didn't walk like someone broken anymore. He walked like someone finished. He resumed his training quietly. He entered the sparring circles without being called. And when he fought, he didn't just win, he dominated. There was no rage in his strikes, no visible emotion. Only clarity, only purpose. The instructors raised their brows, whispering about his renewed discipline. The apprentices watched from behind lowered eyes, sensing something had shifted but not knowing how to name it. He still didn't talk much. But when he did, it was to ask precise questions. Not about the Brotherhood, about the ancient texts, about forbidden strategies, about the rituals buried beneath Korriban's official curriculum. The masters gave vague answers, sometimes warnings, But Bane didn't press them. He no longer needed their truth. He had found something older, and it was growing inside him like a second heart. At night, he returned to the valley, not to pray, not to beg, to prepare. He practiced rituals in the open air, quiet, precise, forgotten by time but remembered in instinct. He trained his body until it broke, then healed it with focused will. He channeled the Force not through emotions, but through focus sharpened to a blade. Every hour brought him closer to the shape of what he was meant to become. Not a Sith among many, a Sith above them. The Brotherhood believed they could preserve the dark side through compromise. But Bane saw now that compromise was decay. Their numbers were not strength. They were a weakness masked as strategy. He studied the Jedi from a distance, their structure, their reliance on harmony, their blind spots. And for the first time, he understood something deeper. The Jedi had survived not because they were stronger, but because the Sith had made themselves small. 100 dark warriors fighting over shadows, afraid to be outshined, afraid to be outlived. Bane felt no such fear. He wasn't seeking permission. He was becoming inevitable. He began rebuilding his connection to the Force in private, removing every layer of instruction the Brotherhood had placed on him. He relearned how to draw from pain without losing control. He studied the rituals of essence transfer, memory storage, alchemical augmentation. He wasn't chasing immortality, not yet, but he was building a foundation that would last longer than a generation. In the final days before his break, he returned to the dueling ring one last time. Sirac was waiting. The crowd gathered quickly. They expected revenge. What they saw was efficiency. Bane didn't gloat, didn't speak, didn't hesitate. He dismantled Sirac with terrifying calm bone, tendon, focus until the favored apprentice lay unconscious at his feet. The instructors tried to intervene, but the room had already shifted. Everyone knew. Bane was not one of them anymore. He was something else. When he walked away from Sirac's broken body, he did so without looking back. He wasn't proving anything. He was announcing it. That night, he returned to the valley for the last time, not as a student seeking answers, but as a shadow preparing to reshape the future. The fire inside him no longer flickered. It burned steady, controlled. And in the darkness behind his eyes, the rule of two stood waiting. Not a memory, not a theory, a weapon. He didn't walk like a returning student. He walked like someone burying the place that made him. When Darth Bane reappeared at the academy, no one spoke his name aloud. He had been gone too long, forgotten by some, written off by most. But the silence around him now wasn't dismissal. It was fear. He was no longer the man they had last seen. The uncertainty was gone. The doubt buried in the valley. What stood in his place was something colder, something that didn't ask questions anymore. The Force moved differently around him. Not louder, but heavier, as if the shadows bent slightly when he passed. The instructors greeted him with cautious indifference. They didn't know what he had learned. Not yet. They saw a disciplined warrior, a hardened student, a once promising acolyte finally returning to fall in line. But Bane had no intention of standing in line. He listened in silence as they spoke of Lord Khan's progress in the war against the Jedi, of the Brotherhood's new campaign on Ruisan, of the glory to come. Bane didn't argue. He didn't reveal his contempt. He simply watched them with the patience of someone planning a funeral. He joined the war not as a dissenter, but as a loyal soldier. It was easier that way. He let them believe he had returned to serve. They gave him command of a unit. He took it without question, and led them to victory after victory. His tactics were brutal but efficient. He conserved strength where others burned it. He sacrificed pawns without hesitation. And he began planting the seed of a new idea quietly, subtly. That perhaps the Brotherhood was flawed. Not openly, not yet. But in private, in the quiet moments between battles, he spoke with other Sith about how power had become fractured, about how the Jedi, despite their losses, remained focused, unified. While the Sith bled each other behind Khan's speeches, most dismissed him. Some listened. A few agreed. It didn't matter. He wasn't trying to win a debate. He was preparing a grave. The first time he met Lord Khan, it was not in a throne room but on a warship overlooking Ruzan's orbit. Khan was charming, charismatic. He called Bane brother. Bane bowed, smiled, and silently judged the man unworthy of everything he claimed to protect. Khan was not weak, but he was hollow, a leader who feared division more than failure, a lord who maintained peace within the Sith by binding their power in chains of flattery and compromise. And compromise, Bane knew now, was the death of the dark side. He fought alongside the Brotherhood for a time, learning its movements, studying its commanders, memorizing their weaknesses. He wanted to see it all, its foundations, its rituals, its beliefs. He wanted to understand every piece of it, so he could end it completely. He returned to the tombs between battles. He communed with the Force in isolation. He strengthened his will not through conquest, but through patience. The rule of two was no longer just an idea. It was a vow. He would not challenge Khan in the open. He would not raise his blade until the moment was right. Because killing a Sith Lord was easy. But making the Sith remember who they truly were, that required extinction. Bane didn't act out of hatred. He acted because he understood. The Sith could not be saved. They could only be rebuilt. And to rebuild, he had to become the hand that ended them. Ruzan was not a battlefield. It was a wound. When Bane stepped onto its soil, the air felt heavy with the weight of every life taken there. The wind carried ash from forests burned down to roots. The ground shook with distant detonations, each one a reminder of how long the war had dragged on. The Jedi and Sith had been fighting across these plains for months, maybe years. No one could say with certainty anymore. The land was so scarred that even the Force felt tired. Bane saw it immediately. This wasn't a war for victory. It was a war for exhaustion. The Jedi fought with discipline, holding their positions, protecting civilians who no longer had homes to return to. Their masters spoke of duty, of hope, even as their faces revealed how close they were to breaking. The Sith fought with desperation. Lord Khan's followers clung to his words like a lifeline. His promise of unity had turned into a cage that trapped them in endless battle. Bane watched them both with quiet clarity. The Jedi died for purpose. The Sith died for pride. And neither side understood how much the other had already lost. His own unit struggled to comprehend the scale of the conflict. They were soldiers, but Ruzan didn't need soldiers. It devoured them. Stealth missions became ambushes. Patrols turned into massacres. Surprise offensives ended in smoke so thick it blinded the sun. The Brotherhood blamed the Jedi. The Jedi blamed the Sith, but Bane saw the truth. The war was a result of failure on both sides. Khan had led the Sith here not to win, but to survive. He wanted to trap the Jedi, crush them through attrition, and declare victory for the sake of appearance. But the Jedi Masters fought with something the Brotherhood couldn't understand: an unwavering commitment to ending the conflict, not extending it. Every day, Bane walked the edges of the battlefield, studying the movements of both armies. He saw how the Brotherhood scattered its strength, how Khan favored diplomacy over dominance, how powerful Sith Lords muted their abilities to avoid overshadowing each other. He felt disgust, but not anger. Anger implied surprise. This weakness had been growing for years. He sat one evening near a ruined ridge, watching sparks from a distant skirmish flicker against the night sky. The Force swirled around him, filled with fear, courage, confusion, and death. So much death. A Jedi strike team passed through the valley below. He didn't hide. They were too focused on their wounded to sense him. Their lightsabers glowed softly, illuminating faces marked by grief. Bane watched them with a strange calm. He didn't hate them. He didn't respect them. He simply understood them. They were the mirror opposite of the Brotherhood, united not by deception, but by conviction. Two broken orders fighting over a battlefield that could no longer sustain life. Later, when he returned to the Sith encampment, he found Khan preaching to a cluster of exhausted warriors. The Dark Lord spoke of harmony, trust, brotherhood. Words that had no place in the Sith language, spoken by a man too afraid to embrace the truth. The Sith around him nodded, encouraged, lifted by false hope. Bane stood at the edge of the gathering, silent. He knew then that the Brotherhood would not survive Ruusan. Not because the Jedi would defeat them, but because the Brotherhood deserved to fall. Their unity was a lie. Their strength was borrowed. Their vision ended at Khan's feet. The war would not end through strategy or courage. It would end because someone had the will to cut away the rot. Bane didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He only felt the quiet acceptance of a truth he had known since Korriban. For the Sith to rise again, this war had to die first. The more Bane studied the Brotherhood, the more he saw how fragile they truly were. Their power didn't come from conviction or mastery. It came from numbers, from confidence, from the illusion that unity made them strong. Illusions were easy to shatter. He did not confront them outright. He didn't need to. Words were enough. Quiet suggestions planted in passing conversations. Subtle questions asked during strategy briefings. Observations whispered near tired Sith Lords who longed for a simple answer to a complex war. He spoke of weapons the ancient Sith once used, of rituals powered by sacrifice, of techniques that could end entire armies in a single moment. He described them not with reverence, but with hesitation, just enough to ignite Lord Khan's curiosity, but never enough to reveal his own intent. Khan was many things, but above all, he was insecure. He needed to be admired. He needed to be followed. And the more the war dragged on, the more he feared losing his authority. Bane saw that fear and sharpened it. Late at night, he visited Khan's command tent. The Dark Lord listened eagerly as Bane spoke of a weapon whispered in the oldest tombs. A weapon that turned the Force inward, binding the minds of every Sith who touched it. A thought bomb. It was powerful, devastating, and suicidal. Khan asked where Bane had learned of such a thing. Bane simply replied, "In places the Brotherhood has forgotten." Those words struck Khan harder than any blade. Forgotten, lost, ignored. Everything Khan feared. By dawn, the Dark Lord was obsessed. He summoned his advisors, demanding they discuss the possibility. Some argued it was too dangerous. Others believed it was impossible. But Khan silenced them all, confident that a weapon born from unity was meant for a brotherhood built on the same. He convinced himself it would work. He convinced others as well. Bane said nothing. He didn't have to. The Brotherhood's hunger for a final victory did the rest. When word spread through the ranks that a ritual was being prepared, some Sith questioned it. They felt unease, a tremor in the force that warned them of catastrophe. But the pressure of Khan's leadership, the exhaustion of the war, and the promise of ending the Jedi clouded their judgment. All Bane needed to do was stand among them and say, "If we are truly united, this will end the war." A single sentence. A single push. The Brotherhood followed Khan into the caves beneath Ruusan, where the ritual would take place. Hundreds of Sith gathered in a tight circle, their minds feeding into the swirling current of the Force. Their energy crackled through the tunnels, electric and unstable. The air thickened with fear, silent, shameful, unspoken. But Khan pressed on. He raised his hands, eyes wide with fanatic devotion, and began the chant Bane had described. Students repeated it. Knights echoed it. Masters sustained it. Their power intertwined like threads pulled too tight. Bane stepped backward, not out of fear, out of calculation. This weapon was not meant for him. He watched from the shadows as the energy condensed, twisting into a sphere of compressed thought, compressed rage, compressed fear. It pulsed with the combined minds of the Brotherhood, seeking release. Kayan shouted the final word. The thought bomb collapsed inward, and Bane felt the Force recoil. A shockwave tore through the caves, swallowing every Sith caught in the ritual. Their consciousnesses were ripped from their bodies in an instant, trapped forever in a storm of frozen thought. The Jedi, who tried to stop them, were consumed as well. The Brotherhood died screaming. Bane did not look away. This was not murder. It was evolution. When the echoes finally faded, he stepped into the darkness they left behind, listening to the silence of an order that had forgotten itself. The ancient Sith had returned, through him. When the smoke settled, the caves of Ruusan fell silent. No cries, no movement, no presence in the Force except echoes, pain trapped in the air, spiraling endlessly inside the thought bomb's crater. Bane stood at the edge of it, alone. What had once been the heart of the Brotherhood was now a wound in the world, a deep hollow where minds had been burned into the Force itself. Neither Jedi nor Sith would ever step there without feeling it. He had not just watched the Brotherhood die, he had made sure it would never rise again. Ruusan was quiet now. The battle was over. But Bane wasn't celebrating. This was not triumph, it was correction. The Sith Order had collapsed under its own betrayal. Too many voices, too many lies. He had given them exactly what they wanted. Unity, one last great act of togetherness. It had destroyed them. The Jedi believed they had won, that the Sith had finally perished in their own madness. And for a moment, Bane let them believe it. He walked the ruins of the battlefield unnoticed, hidden by the dark side, wrapped in the silence of finality. All around him were the remains of armies, lightsabers scorched into soil, armor scorched to bone. Jedi and Sith alike, reduced to ash by a ritual they never fully understood. But Bane understood. The Force didn't care about victory. It responded to will, and his will had survived. He did not weep for the dead. He did not mourn the loss of names etched in Korriban's walls. They had already buried themselves. He left the battlefield behind and returned to the wilderness, no banners, no allies, no teachings to guide him. Because now, there were no teachings left to follow. Only the rule he would write himself. The rule of two. It was not mercy. It was not tradition. It was necessity. The dark side thrived when sharpened, not shared. It needed a master to wield it. It needed an apprentice to crave it. No councils, no rivals, no brotherhood. Just one line, passed through fire and challenge. He would become the beginning of that line, but he would not be its end. In the days that followed, he began searching not for vengeance, not for war, but for an heir. A successor who could inherit his knowledge, survive his discipline, and one day destroy him. Because that was the law now. If the apprentice could not surpass the master, the Sith would rot again. So he walked the galaxy in shadows, listening for whispers, watching for signs. A child touched by the Force, a mind unbound by fear, a heart not yet softened by peace. It would take time, but time was no longer an enemy. Time was an ally. The galaxy had turned its gaze away. The Jedi rebuilt. The Republic breathed easier. They believed the darkness had ended. They believed the Sith had finally died. And that belief was the greatest gift they could offer him. He moved beneath their notice, gathering power in fragments, ancient tomes, forbidden knowledge, techniques long thought lost. Every day, his reach extended further, his vision clearer. He was not hiding. He was planting. The future of the Sith would not rise in fire. It would rise in silence. And when it returned, it would not be as an army. It would be as a blade. One mind, one rule, one purpose. Bane no longer served the Sith. He was the Sith, and everything that came next would carry the mark of his will. The galaxy believed the Sith were dead. After Ruusan, after the thought bomb, after the chaos that swallowed both armies, the Republic issued its quiet declaration. The Sith have been wiped out. The Jedi agreed. They searched the ashes, found no survivors, and turned away. But the dark side does not die in fire. It waits. On the barren world of Ambria, far from the trade routes and far from suspicion, Darth Bane stepped into the life he had chosen. The planet was a graveyard of past corruption, poisoned long ago by a dark sorceress, and sealed only by the sacrifice of a Jedi healer. Its surface was cracked, its soil thin, its lakes filled with shadows that had no source. It felt like home. Bane built nothing resembling a fortress. He didn't need walls, he didn't need armies, he needed silence. The rule of two was still only a seed, growing quietly in his mind. To fulfill it, he needed time to reshape his strength and time to find the one who would inherit everything he had learned. But apprentices were not found through searching. They were revealed through the Force. Until then, he lived like a phantom. He hunted beasts for food. He trained in the open desert, carving deep scars in the earth with each strike of the Force. He meditated near Lake Nath, letting the darkness press against him like a tide trying to pull him under. Every day sharpened him further. He studied ancient texts recovered before Ruusan. He deciphered fragments of long-dead holocrons. He examined rituals forgotten by the Brotherhood, strengthening his mind for the future he intended to shape. But his solitude was not peaceful. At dusk, the wind carried whispers through the rocks, echoes of spirits trapped beneath Umbria's broken surface. They were remnants of the corruption the Jedi healer had sealed away, and Bane felt them move beneath his feet like cold water. They didn't frighten him. They warned him. He wasn't alone in the Force. The galaxy was shifting. Something was coming. For weeks, he ignored the feeling, focusing instead on building his connection to the dark side into something deeper and more controlled. He had no master now, no rivals, no brotherhood to corrupt the meaning of power. Every failure was his alone. Every improvement was his victory. One night, while meditating on a ridge overlooking the valley, he felt a disturbance, not violent, not dangerous, just sudden. Like a candle being lit in a room that had been dark for years. It was faint, untrained, fragile, but undeniably touched by the Force. A presence, a mind, a small one, a child. Bane opened his eyes slowly. He saw nothing across the valley. No movement, no ships, only dust drifting in the wind and the dim flicker of lightning far beyond the horizon. But the feeling persisted. Young, afraid, full of potential. Not Jedi potential. Not the calm, tempered light he had sensed during the war. This was different, raw, tense, like a bowstring pulled too tight. He followed the sensation across the valley, letting it guide him like a trail of cold fire. Hours passed, the sky darkened, but the presence grew stronger. Eventually, he reached the edge of a camp, small, temporary, built by refugees fleeing the war that still scarred the galaxy. He stayed hidden among the rocks, watching, listening. Voices argued around a dying fire. People frightened and desperate, and then, beneath the noise, he felt it again, that flicker of power moving like a heartbeat in the night. A girl wandered at the edge of the camp. Small, barefoot, covered in dust. Bane sensed fear in her, but not weakness. Her fear had teeth. When a predator burst from the brush moments later, snarling with hunger, the girl didn't run fast enough. It struck, tearing into one of the adults instead. Screams erupted, chaos followed. And the Force inside her answered. Not with control, with instinct. The creature recoiled, thrown back by an invisible strike of pure terror. Bane stepped from the shadows. He watched the girl turn, trembling, eyes wide, not with innocence, but with something he recognized deep inside himself. The darkness had chosen, and its choice stood before him. She didn't scream when he approached. The girl stood barefoot in the dirt, eyes locked on the man in black robes, her face frozen somewhere between defiance and disbelief. The others ran, some toward the wounded, some into the desert, but she stayed. Bane studied her. She couldn't have been older than 10. Her arms were thin, her hair matted with dust and blood. But her presence in the Force moved like smoke, thin, uncertain, and yet filled with tension. Like a wire that hadn't snapped yet, but was close. He stepped closer. She didn't flinch. "What's your name?" he asked. Her voice was low, almost broken. "Rain." It didn't suit her. He said nothing, only nodded once, and turned his gaze back toward the camp. 2 adults lay dead. The others hadn't even seen what she'd done. The predator had fallen, skull cracked open by a force it couldn't see. The strike hadn't been trained, hadn't been focused. It had simply happened. That was what interested him most. Raw power was rare, but fear wielded with instinct that was something else entirely. He looked back at her. "You used the Force." She didn't answer. He stepped closer, crouching to her level. "Do you know what that means?" She shook her head. "I didn't mean to do anything." "You don't have to mean it," he said. "The Force doesn't ask permission. It answers instinct." She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Bane reached into his robe and pulled a ration bar from a side pouch. He broke it in half and offered it. She hesitated, then took it. It wasn't kindness. It was a test. He wanted to see if she would take something from a stranger. She did, without a word. He stood again and turned away. "The others won't understand what happened. They'll call you dangerous, maybe worse." Rain looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're my family." He didn't turn around. "No, they were people who found you. That doesn't make them yours." The girl watched him walk into the dark, his presence in the Force like a shadow stretching across the sand. She didn't understand what he was. Only that he had looked at her like no one else ever had, not with fear, not with pity, but with recognition. That night, the camp packed quickly. The creature's attack had shaken them, and Ruusan was no longer safe. Word was spreading of monsters, Sith ghosts, curses. They wanted off-world transport before another tragedy struck. Rain moved quietly, sitting near the edge of the group. When no one was looking, she slipped away. She didn't know where she was going, only that the man would be there. And he was. Waiting in the shadows, arms folded, as if he had known she would come. He didn't smile. He didn't offer comfort. "You don't belong with them," he said. She nodded. "Once. I know." He turned and began walking. "Come, then." And she followed. Days passed. They traveled through the wilds of Ambria in silence. She didn't ask questions. He didn't explain. But she watched everything. How he moved. How he breathed. How the ground never resisted him. At night, she dreamed of things she didn't understand, temples buried in fire, stars that spoke in whispers, her own face reflected in a pool of black water. Bane said her name once, quietly, testing it. "Rain." She shook her head. He tilted his gaze. "I don't want it anymore," she whispered. He nodded, then said, with certainty, "Zana." She looked up at him as though hearing it for the first time. It wasn't a gift. It was a command, and the first step toward becoming something else. They did not train like the Jedi. There were no temples, no teachers, no warm welcomes. There was only wilderness, silence, and a master who believed the only true lesson was survival. Bane did not speak unless necessary. Zana did not ask unless she had to. Their days began before sunrise. Bane would wake her with a word, or sometimes without one. She would rise, bruised from the night before, sore from the hours spent channeling the Force in ways her body wasn't ready to sustain. But pain, he told her, was the first teacher. The second was fear. She learned quickly. At first, she resented the hardship, the hunger, the loneliness. But something deeper kept her going, a certainty that this path, however brutal, was hers alone. Bane did not praise her, but he never stopped watching. He gave her exercises that seemed cruel, walking blindfolded through unstable ravines, hunting predators with her bare hands, meditating beside the cursed shores of Lake Naths, where whispers threatened to break her thoughts apart. She cried the first time. He said nothing, just watched her recover or not. She recovered. The next time, she didn't cry. She screamed instead, and the scream shattered stones. The dark side responded. not to obedience, but to truth. And Bane felt it swell around her like a shadow being pulled from the edge of her mind. He was not molding her into a warrior. He was feeding something that already lived inside her. At night, they studied texts from the tombs of Korriban. He read aloud, slowly, forcing her to absorb every word: rituals, codes, histories written in languages older than the Republic itself. She memorized passages without realizing it. The cadence of ancient Sith doctrine etched itself into her bones. There is only power. Those who seek it must be willing to pay its price. Zana repeated it in her sleep. Still, Bane tested her, not just her strength, but her will. One day, he left her alone for 3 nights without food. When she found him again, she was shaking with hunger and rage. He asked what she had learned. "That weakness begs to be broken," she said. He nodded. Another time, he handed her a blade and told her to kill a local scavenger who had stolen from their supplies. She hesitated, not because she felt mercy, because she wasn't sure yet whether her decision was more important than his command. That was when Bane knew she wasn't ready. Not yet. He didn't punish her. He simply waited. The next time, she didn't hesitate. She struck fast, clean, no questions, no doubts. And afterward, when Bane asked her why she did it, she said, "Because you told me to." He shook his head. "Wrong answer," he said. "Do it again, and know why." Their bond deepened in silence. It was not affection, it was not trust. It was tension. A line drawn from master to apprentice, forged not in loyalty, but in expectation. One day, she would rise, and she would have to break him. They both knew it. Every day she survived, Bane grew more certain of her potential. But deep within him, a question remained. Could he truly train her to destroy him? Could he shape her into a Sith powerful enough to eclipse his own legacy? He told himself it was the way. The rule demanded it. Evolution required it. But part of him, a part he kept buried beneath discipline, wondered, would he see her coming? Or would he be the last to know when she struck? He watched her sleep. Not out of sentiment, out of necessity. In the quiet moments between worlds, when their ship drifted through hyperspace and the galaxy seemed paused in silence, Darth Bane studied the girl who would one day try to kill him. Zana. She lay still, curled into herself in the corner of the cabin, her small hands folded beneath her head. She looked peaceful, weak, even. But Bane knew that was a lie. A surface image. Beneath it, the dark side pulsed like a second heart. She was growing stronger and more dangerous. When they first began, he thought of her as a vessel, an heir, a means to preserve his teachings. But now, she was more than that. She was the rule. The rule of two demanded succession through strength, not inheritance. A master would teach everything. An apprentice would learn, wait, and then strike. There was no room for affection. No space for legacy. Only truth. Only death. And yet, Bane could not ignore the slowness with which he advanced her training. He told himself it was for her benefit, that he was ensuring her survival. But something in the shadows of his mind whispered otherwise. Fear, not of her, but of what would remain after her. He had shaped her carefully, chosen her not for power alone but for clarity. Zana was patient, calculating. She had already begun building layers of deception, masks within masks. Even he could no longer read every thought. And that pleased him. it also unsettled him, because that meant she was almost ready. The days blurred as they moved from world to world, learning, hiding, studying the cracks within the Republic and the Jedi. Bane taught her about manipulation, how to infect systems of power, how to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of rulers. He showed her how to smile while lying, how to survive without leaving footprints in the Force. She absorbed it all. One day, she returned from a solo mission with blood on her tunic and silence in her eyes. She didn't explain. He didn't ask. Instead, he handed her a new holocron, this one ancient, stolen from a lost Sith shrine. "This," he said, "will kill you if you open it without discipline." She took it and opened it within the hour. The power inside bent toward her, not with ease, but with recognition. The spirit of its creator, a long-dead Lord of the Sith, tested her mind, her will, and Zana passed. She extracted its knowledge not by force, but by invitation, by understanding. It was then Bane realized something deeper than fear. He had built not only an apprentice, he had built a rival, and perhaps, one day, a successor. But there was no comfort in that thought, only the chill of inevitability, because the rule demanded one final lesson. A confrontation, not of emotion, but of necessity. Bane had taught her everything he knew. One day, she would turn that knowledge against him. He would either fall, or prove unworthy of the rule he had created. She stood beside him one night beneath the stars of Prakith, looking out across the ruins of a fortress lost to time. "Do you think," she asked softly, "that they would have feared us if the Brotherhood had survived?" He didn't answer at first. Then, quietly, "They would have envied us." She smiled, but it wasn't a smile of agreement. It was a smile of doubt. He saw it, and said nothing. Their time was coming, but not yet. The galaxy still slept, unaware of the storm forming beneath its surface. The Jedi believed themselves victorious. The Republic was content in its corruption. And in the dark, two Sith waited. One to embody power, the other to crave it. He had reshaped the Sith from ruin, broken them down to two, rebuilt their future from the silence left behind on Ruusan. And yet, as years passed, Darth Bane found no peace in his victory. Power had never felt so heavy. He trained Zana, watched her grow stronger, smarter, colder. She was everything he had planned for. And still, he waited for her to strike, waited for the betrayal that had to come. The rule of two wasn't a theory. It was a sentence passed down from one Sith to the next, and its price was death. But she didn't move. She played her part too well. That was the problem. At first, Bane believed it was patience, then fear, then strategy. But soon, he began to wonder, was she delaying the inevitable or denying it? Doubt began to cloud his thoughts, and doubt, in a Sith, was more dangerous than any wound. He told himself he wasn't growing weak. His body still held power few could rival. His will had survived Korriban, survived the collapse of the Brotherhood, survived the firestorms of Ruusan. But his hands trembled sometimes in the morning. His strength took longer to return after duels. The dark side obeyed, but more slowly now. And that was the first sign. The Force served power, not age. It didn't matter how great his mind remained, how much knowledge he had hoarded. If his body failed, Zana would strike when she was ready, or worse, not at all. He could not allow the rule to break. So Bane began to search, not for her successor, not for an apprentice, for something deeper, something forbidden. Something even the Brotherhood of Darkness had only whispered of eternal life through the Force. Not like the Jedi, not ascension, domination, control, immortality. He remembered tales, legends scrawled in the margins of decaying scrolls, Sith lords who had cheated death, spirits trapped in armor, voices preserved in tombs. He had laughed at those stories once. He wasn't laughing anymore. Every hour Zana waited made the question louder. What if she wasn't worthy? What if she feared him more than she believed in the rule? What if his legacy, the entire Sith future, was being preserved, only to die with him? He couldn't ask her, and he couldn't trust her. That left only one path: preservation through knowledge. Extension of life not through heirs, but through secrets, through dark rituals deeper than holocrons would ever reveal. He began writing, recording, archiving all he knew, but even as he did it, he knew it wasn't enough. What the Sith needed could not be stored. It had to be lived. The nights grew longer. Sleep gave way to meditation. Meditation gave way to whispers. And the whispers never stopped. He told himself they were echoes, ghosts of Sith past, awakened by his power. But somewhere deep within, he feared the truth that they weren't ancient voices at all. They were his own thoughts, circling back, repeating, doubting, warning. You built the rule, they seemed to say. But did you build an heir, or only a shadow? Zana watched him, always from the edge of the room, not with fear, not with ambition, but something worse. Stillness. He felt her presence like a knife not yet drawn, and that, more than anything, began to consume him. A question he had never considered before, one that would now haunt every moment he spent near her. What if the rule had worked? But the apprentice had no intention of ever ending it. There were places in the galaxy where even the Jedi refused to walk. Worlds swallowed by night, shaped by ancient wounds, waiting in silence for anyone foolish enough to seek them. Bane went anyway, because answers didn't live in safety. They lived in the ruins left behind by those who had already paid the price. His search began on Lehon, where the sand felt older than the Republic itself. Jagged stone corridors stretched beneath the surface, lined with carvings worn smooth by time. The air carried no sound, as if the planet itself was holding its breath. He descended alone. Bane felt them before he saw anything: echoes of Sith long dead, clinging to the walls like dried blood. Their anger brushed against him, testing him, judging him. Most were weak, remnants of lords whose names had been forgotten. But deeper in the ruins, something stronger lingered. A presence that pressed against his mind. It wasn't a spirit, not exactly. More like a memory refusing to fade. He followed it to a sealed chamber where a cracked holocron lay buried under rubble. Its creator had been ancient even by Sith standards. Bane reached for it, and the chamber trembled. Dust drifted from the ceiling, a warning, almost gentle, telling him to stop. He didn't. The holocron snapped open, releasing a voice dry as bone. It whispered about rituals meant to stretch life, about the difference between surviving and existing, about the cost of forcing the dark side to obey flesh. Bane listened for hours. When he emerged from the ruins, dawn was breaking over Lehon. His hands shook, his vision blurred, but he carried the holocron. Knowledge had a price. He would pay it later. His search didn't end there. It pushed him to Korriban next, though he knew the planet held dangers even he could not fully predict. The Valley of the Dark Lords waited like an open grave, Statues towered above him, faces eroded into hollow expressions. Every step stirred the presence of those who had once ruled. They whispered too, not through words, through pressure, through emotion, through memories buried so deep they felt like his own. He walked past tombs carved with symbols of conquest, fury, and ambition. But he sought none of them. He wanted the oldest truths, the ones buried under layers of arrogance and failure. He found a hidden passage beneath the tomb of Balia Darzu, a Sith lady known for shaping life itself. Inside were fragments of journals describing a ritual that fused essence with armor, trapping spirit within metal. A twisted form of immortality, not freedom, but survival. Bane studied every line. He saw the flaw immediately. Darzu had lived beyond death, but not beyond suffering. Her spirit had been bound, unable to change, unable to grow. That wasn't life. That was imprisonment. And yet, she had lasted long enough for her enemies to fear her return. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was a direction. He kept going. Zayast, Ambria, Dathomir. Worlds where the Force bled through the surface like oil. Each planet changed him more than the last. His body weakened while his knowledge grew. His power felt heavier, sharper, as if the dark side was cutting him from the inside out. And through it all, the Jedi hunted. They felt him like a storm passing through systems. They gathered clues, tracked rumors, followed scars he left behind, old temples cracking under the weight of his presence, settlements whispering about a figure cloaked in shadow. Bane sensed them more often now. Sometimes at a distance, sometimes close enough that he held his breath. But they never caught him. Not because he hid, but because he wanted them to fear the idea of him more than the reality. Every tomb he uncovered, every holocron he claimed, every ritual he dissected brought him closer to an answer he could almost touch. Immortality existed, somewhere. He only needed to live long enough to find it. From the outside, she seemed obedient. Zana listened, she studied, she killed when ordered and remained silent when not. But inside, something had shifted. She no longer feared Bane. She feared becoming him. The years had shaped her into a Sith patient, cruel, calculating. But even as she learned to strike with words as often as with power, she began to see the cost written into his skin. The way he winced when the Force pressed too hard, the tremor in his hands after deep meditation, the flicker of desperation behind his instructions. Bane was growing weaker. He tried to hide it, layering confidence over each lesson, insisting the pain meant he was evolving, becoming more than flesh. But Zana noticed. She always noticed. And she began to wonder if her moment was coming sooner than expected. The rule of two was a promise. One would rise, one would fall. Zana had memorized that truth, but she never rushed it. That wasn't her way. She knew Bane watched her, testing her patience as much as her strength. Every mission he gave, every danger he assigned, they weren't just assignments. They were traps designed to see if she would break. But she didn't, not yet. She let him believe she was still learning. In secret, she built her own network, quiet allies, forgotten contacts from missions long past, people who owed her, people who feared her. Not Sith, not Jedi, just tools. Just voices in the dark who could tell her when the winds shifted. She wasn't just preparing to defeat Bane. She was preparing to replace him. And Bane felt it. He began to test her more directly, assigned her to confront rogue Sith pretenders hiding in the mid-rim. sent her to worlds scarred by the war on Ruusan, where Jedi patrols still lingered. Each mission was harder than the last. Each one left a scar, but Zana completed them all. When she returned from one such mission, a hunt on Done, where a false Sith Lord had tried to claim Bane's legacy, she found her master not in his study, but collapsed in meditation. His mind had drifted too far. His essence had thinned. She didn't help him. She watched. She waited. And when he stirred, he saw her standing over him, her face calm, her presence unreadable. She said nothing, neither did he. But everything had changed. Zana began to study Sith sorcery more deeply, poring over tomes Bane had considered too obscure. She found secrets hidden in the margins of ancient scrolls, techniques of possession. Illusions so powerful they blurred reality, ways to rupture the mind before ever touching the body. She didn't show Bane what she learned. She simply grew more quiet, more cold, and still she obeyed. Not because she was afraid, but because the final test wasn't readiness. It was certainty. Zana believed in the rule, believed in the need for strength to shape legacy. She knew Bane had given her everything: knowledge, power, purpose, and she would honor that gift the only way the rule allowed. One day, she would destroy him, but not in anger, in understanding. Their bond had never been warm. It had been forged in violence and sharpened by necessity. But underneath it, there was a strange kind of respect, a symmetry, a knowing. That's what made it so dangerous. Bane no longer saw her as an apprentice. He saw her as a reflection, and reflections eventually break. Bane watched the stars from the shadowed balcony of his fortress, but he no longer saw the future in them, only endings, only silence. The galaxy had grown quiet, too quiet. The Republic and Jedi believed the Sith extinct. The Order had rebuilt itself after Ruusan, stretching again into the core. Peace returned on the surface. But peace, Bane knew, was an illusion, a symptom of blindness. The grand plan was working. Their deception had taken root. Corruption seeped into the Senate. Self-interest spread among Jedi ranks. Bane had planted seeds in shadows, and they were beginning to bloom. But he would not live to see the harvest. His body betrayed him more with each passing day. The obelisks, once a source of power, had nearly killed him. In removing them, he had lost not just their strength but his edge. He had grown slower. The Force did not answer as easily. And Zana was waiting. She said little, did less. But that was the danger. Bane had taught her well. And now, every silence between them carried weight. He began to question everything. Not just Zana's loyalty, but his own decisions. Had he waited too long to force the confrontation? Had he trained her too well? Had he let sentiment delay what had to be inevitable? He thought of seeking a new apprentice. One unshaped, one desperate for power. Someone he could mold quickly. Someone who would challenge Zana, push her into action. That would reveal her strength or her failure. He traveled to the world of Done. There, among the wreckage of ancient Sith ruins, he found the perfect tool. A young man named Set Hearth, powerful in the Force, untrained and driven by ego. Bane tested him, offered him secrets, promised the legacy of the Sith. But Set lacked one thing: conviction. He craved knowledge, not purpose. He sought power, not destiny. And Bane, though desperate, would not compromise the rule. He would not pass his lineage to weakness. The rule demanded strength, not convenience. So he returned to Zana and found her waiting, not in ambush, not in fear, but in readiness. She had felt the disturbance. She had followed his trail. She had seen his intent. And now, at last, she stood before him, her voice calm, her eyes cold. She did not accuse him. She did not beg. She simply told him the truth. It was time. Bane said nothing for a long moment. Then he nodded. Not as a teacher, not as a father, as a warrior. Their final test would not be words or power or legacy. It would be battle. One of them would die, one would rise. It had always been that way. The rule was never just philosophy. It was the blade waiting in silence. And now, after years of preparation, training, lies, and restraint, that blade would be drawn. They chose the world of Ambria, silent, scorched, steeped in pain, a world Bane had known long ago, a world where darkness lingered beneath cracked soil and black skies. It was fitting, a graveyard for the Sith who had come before, and the ones who would never come again. The duel would begin soon, but already the future trembled, not because of who would win, but because of what would come next. For the galaxy still slept, the Jedi still dreamed of peace, and in the stillness before the storm, only two shadows moved. One to embody power, one to crave it. He had always believed his body was a weapon, forged in the mines of Apatros, hardened in the warfields of the Republic, sharpened by the Force. And now, failing, the aches came first small at first, easy to ignore, then stiffness in his limbs, faint tremors in his left hand. It was as if time, after hiding in the shadows for years, had finally remembered him. But Darth Bane did not fear death. He feared something far worse: obsolescence. The rule of two was never meant to be a comfort. It was a design of necessity, a solution to failure. And in that design, the apprentice must rise. The master must fall. That was the way it had always been, the way Bane himself had carved it into the future. But now, standing in the quiet dark of their hidden stronghold, he wondered if it had come too soon. Zana was strong, cunning, patient, but she had not yet made her move. And he could not tell if that was restraint or hesitation. His thoughts spiraled between doubt and resolve. He told himself it was strategy that kept her silent, that she waited for the right moment, that she understood what he had taught her. Yet deep inside, a different fear whispered through his bones. What if she was waiting because she thought she had time? What if she saw his weakness and believed she didn't need to act at all? What if she was wrong? His legacy couldn't end like this. Not with slow decay. Not with his name dissolving into memory before the work was done. The rule was survival. The rule was power. But the rule had never answered one question. What if the master still had more to give? He didn't sleep. Not really. In the hours when most beings surrendered to rest, Bane knelt in silent meditation, listening to the hum of the Force, searching for a thread that might lead him further. His body resisted. His skin, once stone-hard, now bore the scars of sorcery and war. His muscles strained under the weight of simple movements. But his mind was sharper than ever. And that contradiction fueled his obsession. The Sith archives held fragments, old rituals, long-buried texts, names of lords who had defied death in ways the Jedi never dared. Darth and Edu, Sorcerer's Sin. Bane read them all, studied every whisper, every lie disguised as truth. Most paths ended in madness, some in worse. but one stood apart. Essence transfer. A ritual so dangerous, even the Sith had buried it in silence. A way not just to live but to possess, to take a new body, to leap from one vessel to the next like flame across dry wood. It wasn't immortality, but it was close, and it offered him something far more important than time. Control. Still, the price was steep. The ritual required absolute will. Any weakness, any fracture of doubt, and the soul attempting the transfer would be lost, shredded by the void between bodies. But Bane had never doubted himself. Not once. That was his gift. That was what had made him different. While the Brotherhood of Darkness had crumbled under ambition and fear, he had seen the truth. He had survived. He had built the future. And he would not let it die in silence. He began experimenting in secret. Small rituals at first, probes into the dark. He could feel the force resisting him, coiling like a serpent, daring him to move further. Each time he pushed, the pain grew sharper. The whispers in his mind grew louder. But pain had never frightened him. What frightened him was the thought that Xana might watch him falter, and still not act. She studied him carefully, polite, respectful, but always watching. He caught her once, alone in the archives, reading the same texts he thought hidden. She didn't flinch when he entered. She only nodded and closed the volume. No fear, no apology, just awareness. In that moment, something inside him shifted. He had trained her to kill him, prepared her to rise. But what if he was wrong? What if she wasn't ready? Or worse, what if she never would be? He told himself the rule must be preserved, that he would step aside the moment she proved herself. But deep inside, beneath the layers of power and purpose, another thought lingered. What if she failed? What if she couldn't do what needed to be done? And if she couldn't, then who would? The weight of his body grew heavier each day. But it wasn't death pressing down on him. It was time. Legacy. The unbearable question that had no answer. If he died now, would the Sith truly live? He clenched his fist, felt the weakness, and made his decision. He would not go quietly. The ritual did not begin with fire. It began with silence. Bane stood in the center of a forgotten chamber on Prakith, where dust drifted like falling ash and the walls hummed with memories too old to name. He had followed hints, scraps of warnings, and fragments of Sith legends to reach this place. No map had guided him. Only instinct, only hunger. The chamber smelled of stone and old blood. The air felt thick, heavy, as if time itself refused to move. He placed the ancient tome of Darth Bane on a cracked pedestal. Its binding pulsed faintly beneath his fingertips, as though a heartbeat still lived inside it. No holocron, no voice, just a presence. A weight. The words inside were carved in ink that shimmered with a cold that didn't belong to the natural world. Bane inhaled, preparing his mind. The ritual he sought was not simple. It was not kind. And it was not forgiving. Essence transfer. A forbidden technique that promised escape from the body's decay. A way to leap beyond flesh and bone into a vessel strong enough to continue the rule. A path toward immortality that mocked the Jedi's gentle fade into the Force. And Bane had not described it as a gift. He had described it as a battle. One fought in darkness, deeper than death itself. Bane opened the tome. The language was jagged, violent, shaped by voices that never whispered, they commanded. The instructions demanded absolute focus and absolute belief. Even one breath of doubt would doom him. His soul would tear like cloth in a storm. dissolving into nothing. He knew the risks. He also knew he had no choice. The candles around him flickered as he began the first incantation. His voice echoed through the chamber, low and steady. The shadows stretched along the walls like living creatures crawling to escape light. The floor trembled under his boots. The force around him thickened, vibrating like distant thunder. He continued. Each line cut through him with the sharpness of hunger. Each symbol he traced in the air bled faint light. The ritual pulled at him, tugging threads of thought, of memory, of identity. It wanted him, wanted to test him, wanted to know if he could survive its pull. Pain built slowly, knotting itself into his spine. He didn't stop. The chamber began to distort. Corners bent inward, shadows twisted into spirals. The ceiling faded into darkness. The air turned cold enough to freeze breath mid-exhale. And somewhere, far beyond sight, a presence stirred. Not Andedu. Something older. The force recoiled as the presence pressed closer, curious yet cruel. Bane felt it brush the edges of his mind, like claws tapping against glass. It wanted entry. It wanted a crack. It wanted to take what he offered and consume what he hadn't. He pushed it back with a surge of will that rattled the stones beneath him. He had not come to kneel. He had come to conquer. The presence retreated slowly, hatefully slinking back into the dark, and the chamber finally settled. Bane steadied his breathing. His heart pounded so hard it shook his vision. This was only the beginning. He turned the page. The next stage required a host, another body. Someone strong enough to hold his essence, but weak enough to overpower. The ritual was never meant to be practiced alone. It demanded dominance. It demanded struggle. It demanded the death of one so the other could live. Xana's face flashed across his thoughts. He banished it. She was too powerful, too disciplined. Trying to take her body would be suicide unless she hesitated, unless she broke. And he could not trust hesitation, not from her. He needed someone else. A vessel strong enough to survive the ritual but untrained enough to fall under his will. The galaxy held many candidates, criminals, mercenaries, force sensitives, wandering without guidance. But he needed more than strength. He needed opportunity. For now, the ritual was a blueprint, a weapon not yet ready to wield. And though exhaustion clawed at him, he pressed forward, tracing the final sigils into the air. The chamber pulsed once, as if acknowledging him. Then the symbols dissolved. The ritual was his, but the cost echoed through his bones. Already he felt older. His muscles ached from the strain. His vision swam. It was as if the darkness had reached inside him, taking interest, leaving fingerprints. He staggered once before catching himself. He knew the danger. He also knew the truth. Xana sensed something had changed the moment he returned. She didn't ask. She didn't probe. She simply watched him with those still, endless eyes, as if studying a puzzle she almost understood. She sensed the darkness around him. She sensed the weakness beneath it. And somewhere deep inside, she made her own silent decision. The confrontation they had avoided for years was no longer distant. The ritual had narrowed the path. Only death and succession remained. Xana had always known the day would come. It had been promised to her in the first lesson, whispered in the quiet between strikes of her blade, written in the way Bane looked at her, not as a daughter, not as a friend, but as a rival who had not yet grown teeth. One to embody power, one to crave it. She had craved it, but never rushed it. Years passed, she learned, She waited. She watched Bane carve the rule of two into the bones of the galaxy, into the legacy of the Sith. But now, for the first time, he was faltering. Not in body alone, but in spirit. The man who had once stood like iron now walked like stone cracked by time. Slower, heavier, and behind his eyes, doubt. Zannah did not pity him. She respected him. But she also saw the truth. The master had begun to fear the apprentice. She had felt the change after Prakith. He had returned quieter, more withdrawn. His injuries from the war with the Jedi had never fully healed. And worse, he had stopped teaching. Not because she had learned everything, because he had nothing new left to give. He was preparing for something. And so was she. Zannah retreated into her own studies, into the dark texts left behind by the sorcerers of Tund, by the mad alchemists of Ziost. While Bane sought immortality through possession, she turned her mind inward. She didn't want to survive death. She wanted to defeat it, to stand above it. Her power was built not on strength alone, but precision. Where Bane shattered his enemies, Zannah unmade them from the inside. Her tendrils of madness could reduce the most disciplined Jedi to a trembling shell. Her gift wasn't brute force, it was inevitability. And now, inevitability was approaching. She watched him walk through their camp on Ambria one night, firelight casting long shadows over his armored form. He still wore the obelisk shells beneath his robes, though he had begun to complain of pain in his spine, numbness in his hands. The armor was killing him slowly. It had once made him invincible. Now, it was a prison of his own making. She said nothing, because she was ready, but something stopped her from striking. Doubt, not about her power, not about her destiny, but about timing. Killing Bane wasn't just about winning. It was about deserving to win. If she attacked too early, before he had fully passed his prime, she risked losing everything. And if she waited too long, she would miss her moment entirely. The rule demanded a perfect balance between patience and ambition. One mistake, and everything they had built would fall into ruin. That was the secret most did not understand about the rule of two. It was not about cruelty. It was about judgment, about earning your place not through murder, but through victory. The apprentice had to become more than the master, or the Sith would stagnate. The master had to fall only when the apprentice could truly replace him. Zannah paced through the night, her mind churning. She thought of her first kill. She thought of the pain she had buried after Ruusan. She thought of how Bane had lifted her from a child soaked in blood into a shadow feared across the galaxy. And still, she was not sentimental. She was logical. The time was soon, but not yet. Not until she knew what Bane had truly learned on Prakith. Not until she understood the ritual he now studied in silence, scribbling notes with a tremor in his fingers. He had found something terrible. She could feel it. Something that had changed him. If it was essence transfer, then the battle would not just be physical. It would be a war of minds. And if she waited too long, he might try to take her body. She couldn't allow that. So Zannah began preparing not for a duel, but for a war of souls. She found an abandoned enclave near the crystal caverns of Ambria and carved it into a sanctum. Here she meditated, weaving protective spells that would shield her mind. She trained not with her blade but with thought. She practiced resisting illusions, tearing through false realities, strengthening the walls of her psyche. She was no longer Bane's student. She was his replacement in waiting. And every night she looked toward the stars and wondered, did he know? He did, because Bane watched her, too. He saw the way she moved, now silent, careful. He noticed the way her eyes held his gaze longer. He heard the change in her voice when she asked questions she already knew the answers to. She was waiting, and he was waiting. Two predators in the same den. The Sith didn't need armies anymore. They only needed time, and pain, and one clean, final break in the chain. It was coming, and both of them knew it. The storm began without thunder, only silence. Bane sat in stillness beneath the scorched trees of Ambria, his armor heavy, the world distant. He had reached the end of every road he once believed led to power, strength, legacy, and now, survival. But even as the dark side surged through his veins, it could not stop what time had begun. His body was dying. The obelisks no longer whispered invincibility. They itched like sickness. Every breath he took came with effort. Every movement reminded him of mortality. But still, he refused surrender. Because Bane had found a way out. Not from death, but through it. The ancient ritual of essence transfer had revealed itself to him on Prakith, buried within the records of Darth and Dedu. A forbidden knowledge that would allow his spirit to escape his dying body, to take another, to live again in the flesh of the strong. Xana, she was the obvious vessel. She was powerful, trained, disciplined, his creation, his legacy. And yet, if she could not defeat him, she would never deserve the title of Dark Lord. She was the end of the path he had shaped, and perhaps the threat he had raised with his own hands. Bane stood alone in the wasteland, and waited. Xana came without words. She stepped into the clearing like a shadow already formed. No hatred in her eyes, no grief, only calm purpose. It was not a duel of revenge. It was the fulfillment of law. The rule of two had always promised this moment. She drew her blade. He did the same, and the silence broke. The air cracked with lightning as their sabers clashed. Bane moved like a mountain, collapsing every strike, massive, overwhelming, driven by decades of rage and knowledge. But Xana flowed like water around his strength. She danced not with speed, but with inevitability. She was smaller, but faster, lighter, sharper. And she was waiting for the real attack. Because Bane did not want to kill her. He wanted to consume her. The battle shifted, the blades hissed, locked. Then, he dropped his saber and reached with the force. Xana screamed as the pressure invaded her mind. Not pain, not fear, but violation. A second presence, ancient and burning, smashed against her thoughts like fire against ice. His soul reached through the force, wrapped around hers, seeking cracks, weaknesses, an opening. This was essence transfer. This was the final lesson. Bane's voice was not spoken, it existed only in her mind. You are not strong enough. Xana fell to her knees. Her hands trembled. Darkness poured through her, trying to displace her, to erase her. But she did not run. She had always known this would happen. She closed her eyes, and in the storm of their collision, she stopped resisting and started fighting. She didn't use power. She used memory. She showed him the moment he found her broken and shaking on Ruusan. She showed him her first kill. She showed him the years he made her suffer, train, bleed. And she showed him the future. A future he could never control. A Sith order shaped by her will, not his. And then she shattered his hold. Bane screamed, not in sound, but in spirit. For a moment, the force itself seemed to freeze. Two wills locked in eternity, the old and the new, the master and the heir. And then, he was gone. The clearing fell silent. Zana stood slowly, alone. Her hands lowered, her lightsaber flickered and died. She looked down at the armor he had left behind, still twitching, still warm. There was no triumph on her face, no smile. Only the cold, endless weight of what came next. The rule of two had survived, but only one remained. She turned and walked into the darkness, leaving the body of Darth Bane beneath the dead trees. No grave, no fire, no monument, just silence. This was not the end of the Sith. It was their rebirth. And Zana, now Darth Zana, carried not only his teachings but his voice, his thoughts. Some believed a fragment of him remained inside her, forever watching, forever whispering. Others said she had destroyed him completely. But the truth didn't matter. Only the future did. Far across the galaxy, the Jedi believed peace had returned. They saw no more Sith, felt no more darkness. They rebuilt their temples, trained their younglings. They forgot. But the Sith remembered, and in that memory, they grew. From the ashes of one, rose another, and the war was far from over. There were days when he could still feel the power moving freely through his body, like fire, like storm, like purpose. But those days were fewer now, and the power, it no longer obeyed like it once did. The pain came first, sharp and familiar, a dull ache behind the eyes, a tremor in the hand, a fracture behind the voice when he tried to speak with the same certainty he once carried. The obelisks had been gone for years, but Bane sometimes swore he could feel their ghost armor still wrapped around him, as if his flesh remembered what it was like to be invincible. And now, denied that strength, it turned on him, bone by bone. The rituals had cost him more than time. They had hollowed him from within. And though he had touched knowledge that even the ancients feared to transcribe, he had not yet found the secret to become more than flesh, more than breath. He had not yet found immortality. But the rule still bound him. Two, only two. One to hold power, one to crave it. And so he watched Zana, quietly, from the corners of rooms she thought he had already left, in the silences between her questions, in the faint delay between her bow and her breath. She had grown, he had shaped her, and yet she had not struck. Not yet. That, more than the pain, was what disturbed him. She should have challenged him by now. She had the knowledge, she had the will, and still she waited, like a blade that refused to be drawn. Was it fear? Was it patience? Or was it something worse, a flaw buried too deep for even him to see? The valley winds screamed across Ambria, low and restless, like the ghosts of the planet whispering through stone. Here, long ago, a Sith sorceress had once corrupted the land so deeply that the dark side still lived in its soil. Bane could feel it in the sand, in the air, in his breath. This world, scarred and unhealed, mirrored his body, and that too was why he had brought her here. The confrontation would come. It had to, and when it did, he would not leave it to fate. The Force may favor the cunning, the bold, the strong, but it did not forgive weakness, not in master, not in apprentice. He sat in silence within the ruins of an old outpost, watching the horizon. The light was fading, and with it, the illusion of peace. Zana was near. He could feel her. She always announced herself through absence, as if the Force itself recoiled slightly when she passed. That, too, was power. Still, he wondered, would she challenge him with hatred or hesitation? Would her hand strike from fury or from fear? The rule demanded one to rise and one to fall. But Bane no longer trusted the rules. He had built them. But like all creations, they had begun to outgrow him. His fingers flexed slowly, the knuckles cracked. No pain this time, just memory. He could still remember the first time he killed without reason. The weight of it, the silence after. He had believed then that power was about ending life. But now he knew. Real power was not in the killing. It was in what remained after. If Xana was to take everything from him, his name, his legacy, his place, then she would need to prove it. Not to the Force, not to history, to him. And if she could not, then he would remain. Even if his body failed, even if his breath gave out, he would find a way to stay. Because death had no place in the rule. Only the strong, only the Sith, and only one. The cavern's mouth opened like a wound in the skin of the world. It was not marked on any chart. No traveler passed through it. No beasts made their home here. Only the old ones had come, and only once. Long before the Republic, long before the Jedi, before even the Sith as Bane had known them. This place remembered what the galaxy had chosen to forget. And so did he. He walked slowly, cloak brushing the dry stone floor, fingers trailing along walls carved with symbols too old to name. The air was colder here, not with wind, but with memory. Every breath brought with it the taste of something buried, something powerful, something wrong. Bane had spent years chasing fragments of knowledge scrolls from Lehon, whispers of Vitiate's madness, broken records from Korriban. But nothing had held the key, not truly. Even the obelisks, for all their pain and power, had only delayed the inevitable. Flesh withered, time eroded, thought decayed. Unless the will was strong enough. Unless the soul could cling to the Force long after the body fell away. This was what the ancients called essence transfer, the final power, the forbidden right, to pour one's mind into another vessel and cast their spirit out into nothingness. It was not just a test of strength. It was annihilation made sacred. Bane stood at the heart of the chamber now. Before him, the altar cracked but not broken, stained with blood not yet forgotten by the stone. He did not kneel. The Sith did not pray. They commanded. He placed his hand upon the surface, and the Force surged in protest. The dark side did not give freely. It devoured, it tested, it judged. And as it swelled around him now, pressing against his mind like a storm without sound, Bane welcomed it. He had no fear left to give. His voice did not echo when he spoke. It sank like a blade into soil. Let the flesh be hollow. Let the will remain. The ritual began. Visions came in flashes of battlefields burning, of tombs breaking open, of Xana's face twisted in doubt. He saw his own corpse lying at her feet, broken and empty. Then he saw it rise again, wearing her skin, wearing her fear. This was no illusion. The dark side did not offer comfort. It offered only truth. And Bane endured it. Hour after hour, wave after wave of pressure crashed over his mind. He had bound his soul to the Force once before. In the moment he had slain the Brotherhood. He had seen what waited behind death, and now it clawed at him again. But he did not flinch, because he remembered something the others had forgotten. Immortality was not peace. It was pain refined into purpose, and the rule demanded a master who would never beg for rest. His body trembled, the ritual drained him. The Force resisted. but still he stood. Because this was not about preserving his life. It was about preserving the Sith. And the galaxy would not survive another age of weakness. When it was over, Bane staggered backward, breath ragged. He did not collapse. He would not give the darkness that victory, but inside, he knew. His time was ending. The ritual had carved its warning into him. If he failed to transfer his essence when the moment came, he would die, for real, forever. And so the choice passed to Zana. She did not know what he had done, but soon she would feel it. And when she struck, as she must, he would strike back. Not with a blade, not with a storm, but with everything that made him who he was. Bane would not die screaming. He would become silence. That silence would outlive her, or consume her. The wind on Ambria never stopped. It curled over the black lakes like a whisper, stirring the dead grass and dusting the rocks with ash. There was no sound of life, no voices. Only the steady hum of the dark side beneath the soil, ancient, patient, and waiting. Bane stood at the edge of the water. His armor gleamed dully in the half-light, marked with fractures that had not been there before. Each one told a story, of war, of betrayal, of survival. The obelisks were gone now, burned away in the fires of desperation. What remained was only flesh and will. Behind him, she stepped into view. Zana, robed in silence, her braid coiled like a serpent against her back. She had not drawn her lightsaber, but she didn't need to. It was always close, as if the weapon and her rage shared the same heartbeat. They did not speak. Not at first. There was no need. They had walked this path for years, student and master, shadow and storm. Each lesson had been a wound, each moment of patience a test. And now, the rules stood between them. The final lesson, the final wound. Zana's voice broke the stillness, low and steady. You're weak. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pride. It was observation. Like a healer reading a fading pulse. Bane didn't answer. He turned to face her fully, the wind catching his cloak as if trying to pull it from his shoulders. He studied her, the set of her jaw, the calm in her eyes, the certainty in her stance. She was ready, and he had made her that way. It has to be you, he said. Zana didn't flinch. You knew that the day you found me. Bane nodded. I knew it the day I buried the Brotherhood. The Sith must become more than what I was. Silence again. Then, softly, I won't hold back. Then you've already learned what matters. The sabers ignited as one, red against red. Their hum filled the dead air like a heartbeat returning after a long sleep. Zana moved first, fast, sharp, a blur of precision and rage. Her style was pure Makashi, elegant and cruel. Every strike aimed to wound not just the body, but the mind behind it. Bane met her with raw strength, gemso, power born of war. His blade crashed into hers like a hammer against glass, each strike sending sparks into the sky. They circled each other, blades crossing, breaking, retreating. She struck low, he blocked. He countered high, she twisted, redirected, came in again. Every clash was a question, every parry an answer. But time had no mercy. Bane's grip faltered for a breath. Zana pressed the advantage. A sharp spin, a downward slash, and he staggered. His knee hit the earth. She came for the finish. And then, lightning. It erupted from Bane's hand in a storm of violet fury, engulfing her in arcs of crackling pain. She screamed, but did not fall. Her body convulsed, but her mind stayed clear. She had to stay clear. She reached into the dark side, pulled it around her like a shield, and stepped through the fire. Their blades clashed again. And this time, it was not master and student. It was survival. Xana struck at his heart. He caught her wrist. For a moment, locked in place, they stared into each other's eyes. No fear, no doubt, only the force, and the certainty that one of them would not leave this place alive. He had always believed he would see it coming, that when his end approached, the force would whisper, that the darkness he had mastered would signal the final betrayal, just as it had revealed every deception before. But in the moment it truly mattered, it said nothing, only silence. On the floor of the crumbling structure, amid the cracks and dust of old stones, Darth Bane could no longer feel his hands. His body was failing, not from age or poison or injury, but from her. Xana knelt beside him, her face marked with quiet hatred and something else, grief. It was strange to look at her like this, not as an apprentice, but as something beyond. She wasn't a child anymore. She wasn't learning, she wasn't waiting, she had made her choice. He wanted to speak, to ask her if she had waited too long, if she understood the weight of what she was about to claim. But the words wouldn't come. He had always been the voice of power, the one who declared truths no one else dared. And now, as death pressed into his chest, he couldn't even whisper. The ritual was ready. She had carved the sigils herself. The incantations had been memorized. His soul, his will, his identity, everything he had become was about to be torn from his flesh and hurled like a weapon into hers. He had trained her for this, prepared her to survive it, but he hadn't trained her to win. Lightning curled in her fingers, not rage-born, not reckless, controlled, cold. She didn't tremble, she didn't flinch. She looked into his eyes and saw everything he had ever been, and she didn't look away. The pain was unlike anything he'd felt before, not the searing kind that made a body scream, but the quiet, internal unraveling, a deep, sickening fracture in the force itself. His consciousness was being pulled apart, unmade, scattered into the ritual like ink in water. He pushed back. For the first time in years, he felt afraid, not of death, but of disappearance. He had crafted the rule of two, shaped the Sith from its ashes, crushed the Brotherhood, burned worlds, and built a legacy meant to outlive the stars. And yet, here he was, dying, forgotten. No monuments, no witnesses, just a crumbling ruin and a girl who had once called him master. Xana's hands trembled now. He saw it, her resolve was breaking. The battle inside her mind was real. His voice was trying to rise in hers. His soul, desperate, clinging to the ritual, clawing for a vessel, for survival, for escape. But she held, a breath, a flicker, a whisper. And then, it was over. Xana stood. The air around her was wrong now, thicker, colder, sharp with the scent of ancient sorcery. Her eyes, once unsure, were something else. Not his, not hers, something new. She turned to the dying firelight and lifted her hand. It didn't shake. Bane's body lay still. No breath, no sign, and no answer to the one question that still remained. Had she destroyed him, or had he taken her? She would never say. Not to herself. Not to anyone. To the Jedi, the Sith were gone again, lost beneath myths and shadows. But the darkness hadn't vanished. It had only changed shape. Xana would carry his legacy forward, not as a student, but as a sovereign. and whether the voice that now lived in her mind was her own, or the last echo of Darth Bane. No one could say. Only one rule remained, one truth, one voice, and it would never be silenced again.